Section 37 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1 by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Mozart by Otto JAHN, Section 37, Chapter 16, Part 1. Early on the morning of September 23, 1777, Wolfgang and his mother took their departure from Salzburg, leaving Leopold Mozart far from well, and inconsolable in his solitude. "After you had set off," he wrote, September 25, 1777, "I went upstairs quite exhausted and threw myself on a couch. It was with a great effort that I had restrained myself at parting, in order not to add to our grief, and in the confusion I had forgotten to give my son the paternal blessing. I ran to the window and sent it after you both. But as I did not see you drive through the gate, I came to the conclusion that you had already passed, and that I had sat immersed in my grief longer than I supposed." Noneral wept till she made herself ill, and did not recover till the evening, when the two consoled themselves with a game of piquet. Wolfgang, on the contrary, breathed more freely as soon as he had turned his back upon Salzburg. The feeling of relief from the galling oppression of years dispelled the sorrow of parting with his father and sister. In his former journeys he had experienced nothing but encouragement and success, and had been shielded from all the harassing cares of ordinary life, and so he took his way with artless confidence into the wide world. He little dreamt that he had in fact made the first step along a thorny path, to be met from henceforth to the end by difficulty, opposition, pain, and sorrow. His mind was fresh and youthful enough to be diverted by all the little incidents of such a journey. When he sat down in the evening, 11 hora noctis, at Wasserburg, to acquaint his father of their safe arrival, he could think of nothing more important to tell him than of their having seen a cow all on one side. He had met a fat gentleman who remembered having seen Wolfgang a year ago during a performance of Mirabell. He was in company with Herr von Unhold of Memmingen, and they both sent their compliments to Wolfgang's father and sister. It is plain that the boy rejoiced in the feeling of freedom and independence. "Viviamo come I principi, and want nothing but my dear father. It is God's will, and all will go well. I hope you will be well and as contented as I am. I am getting quite expert, and, like another papa, taking care of everything. I have always to pay the postilions, for I can talk to the fellows better than mamma. Pray take care of your health, my dear father." Their first stay was at Munich. The state of affairs there, coupled with their former failure, gave little hope of a prosperous visit. But it was necessary to make the attempt. Furnished with his diplomas of the academies of Bologna and Verona, and with recommendations from Padre Martini, Wolfgang might present himself before the Elector Maximilian as a thoroughly trained musician, and might hope to gain such favor from influential patrons as would justify his undertaking new works. They took up their abode with the old acquaintance Albert, known as the learned host. Wolfgang's first visit was to Count Seau, the inspector of police. He met with a friendly reception, and was advised by the Count to seek an audience of the Elector without delay, and if he did not succeed, to address him by letter. There was no doubt that a first-rate composer was wanted in Munich. Wolfgang next paid his respects to the Prince Bishop of Chiemsee, Count Zeil, who was residing in Munich on a diplomatic mission. He conversed freely on Mozart's plans, and promised to do his best for him with the Elector and his consort. But some days later the bishop said to him, very politely, September 29, 1777, "I do not think you will do much here. I spoke privately on the subject to the Elector at Nymphenburg." And he answered, "It is too soon yet. Let him travel in Italy and make himself a name. I do not refuse anything, but it is too soon yet." The Electress promised to do what she could, but shrugged her shoulders and doubted of success. These unfavorable prognostics were justified when Mozart, introduced by the influential violoncellist Franz Xaver Wojciechka, born 1730, presented himself to the Elector, who was on the point of going hunting with his court. He gives the following account of the interview to his father, September 30th, 1777. "When the Elector approached me, I said, 'I trust your Highness will allow me to lay myself and my services at your Highness's feet.' 'Indeed? Have you left Salzburg altogether?' 'Altogether, your Highness.' 'Indeed? Why? Were you kept too close?' 'May it please your Highness, I asked permission to travel, which was refused, whereupon I took a step which had long been in my mind, for Salzburg is no place for me, that is certain.' 'Mein Gott, young man, but your father is still at Salzburg?' 'Yes, may it please your Highness. He lays his humble duty, etc. I have been in Italy 3 times already. I have written 3 operas, and been elected member of the Academy at Bologna, after writing a trial composition in 1 hour, which usually takes candidates 4 or 5 hours of hard labor. All this proves that I am in a position to serve any court. My greatest wish is to serve your Highness, who is himself a great— Yes, my dear fellow, but I have no vacancy. I assure your Highness that I should do honor to Munich. No doubt, but there is no vacancy. This he said as he was going, and I could only take my humble leave. The Elector being unable, as Leopold Mozart was aware, to engage anyone unless there was a vacancy, no court office could be looked for at Munich. But there seemed fair prospects of an assured position in another direction. Count Cial had interest enough to retain so distinguished a composer, whose energy and productiveness promised good services. He was not only manager, but also part proprietor of the theatre. The Elector paid the band and the ballet, and gave a yearly contribution of 9,000 gulden to the expenses, which was received by Cial. In return, the latter provided the opera and the play, and engaged the members of the two companies, chiefly natives of Munich, who were to be had for 8 to 12 gulden a month. The Italian opera was only given during the carnival, and at great court festivals, and then generally without remuneration. German operas were the rule, that is, adaptations from the French or Italian, for as yet original German opera did not exist. What a brilliant success might be expected from the lively interest of the Munich public in all manners theatrical, if a man of Mozart's genius were to devote himself to German opera. Cial inquired of the Bishop of Chiemsee if Mozart did not receive enough from home to allow him to remain there on a small salary. He should like to keep him. The bishop doubted this. Count Cial preferred receiving a proposal and remained silent, but Mozart could perceive that he was turning the matter over in his mind. He himself was all on fire at the idea of having operas to compose. He gives his father an animated account of the impression made upon him by the performance of a German opera, and by the vocalist, October 12, 1777. The prima donna is named Kieserin. She is the daughter of the cook and of a nobleman here, a pleasant girl and pretty on the stage. I have not seen her nearer yet. She is a native of Munich. I heard her the third time that she played, and thought she had a beautiful voice. Not very strong, but not weak either, and a pure good intonation. Valesi is her teacher, and her style shows that her master understands singing as well as teaching singing. When she had to sustain a note for a couple of bars, I was surprised at the beauty of her crescendo and decrescendo. She has a slow shake, which I like extremely. It is all the clearer and purer when she wants to make it quicker, and the quicker it is, the easier it is. She is an immense favorite with the people here, and I agree with them. Mamma was in the body of the theatre. She went at 4:30 in order to secure a seat. I did not go till 6:30, for I am well enough known to have the entrée to any of the boxes. I watched Mademoiselle Kieserin with my glass, and she drew more than one tear from me. I cried "Brava, bravissima" very often, remembering that this was only her third appearance. The piece was called The Fisher Girl, La Pescatrice, a good translation, with Piccini's music, but with nothing original in it. They want to have a German opera seria soon, and they wish me to compose it. Among the wishers was a certain Professor Huber, whom Mozart had met at the Messmers during his last visit to Vienna, 1771. They renewed their acquaintance at Herr Albert's, where the professor was a frequent visitor. He was the deputy manager of the theatre, and had, as Mozart expressed it, to read all the pieces submitted for performance, to improve, spoil, accept, reject them. This censorship was necessary, since the management performed all that was sent in, and was bound to put in study every native production. And as at that time almost every student and official in Munich was bitten with the mania for authorship, they were overwhelmed with trash. Huber must have felt it a matter of importance to retain such a remarkable genius as Mozart for the Munich theatre. The wish, indeed, was generally felt. Baron Rümmling paid Wolfgang the compliment of saying, "The theatre is my delight, with good actors and actresses, good singers, male and female, and such a capital composer as you are." Of this Wolfgang says, October 2nd, 1777, "It is only talk, certainly, and talk does not go far. But he never spoke so to me before." Wolfgang played several days in succession before Count Joseph von Salem, the chief director of music and the opera, born 1718. He played a good deal out of his head. Then the two Cassazione, Kochel numbers 247 and 287, composed for the Countess Lodron, in the final music, Kochel number 250. You cannot think how delighted the Count was. He understands music, for he cried "Bravo" every time that other fine gentlemen take a pinch of snuff, blow their noses, cough, or begin a conversation. I said to him that I wished the Elector were there, that he might hear what I could do, of which he knows nothing. All these great people believe whatever is told them, and refuse to judge for themselves. It is always the way. I offered him a trial. He was to get together all the artists in Munich, and any he chose from Italy, France, Germany, England, and Spain. I would undertake to write against any of them. I told him what had happened in Italy, and begged him, if the talk turned upon me, to remember all this. He said, "I have very little influence, but what I can do I will, with all my heart." He had some intercourse with musicians, too. Consoli had met him on his entrance into the town, and lost no time in visiting him, and his old friend Becca, the flautist, soon made his appearance. Albert arranged a little concert, with a wretched clavier, alas, alas, and invited a clergyman, Dubreuil, a pupil of Tartini, with the idea that he was a good judge and a clever performer, but this turned out to be a mistake. We first played Haydn's 2 quintets, but it was dreadful. I scarcely heard him. He could not play 4 bars without mistakes. His fingering was bad, and he left out all the sospiri. He was very polite and praised the quintets, but... Then I played my concerto, clavier, in C and B flat, in E flat major, Kerschel numbers 238, 246, and 271, and my trio, Kerschel number 254. The accompaniment was fine. In the adagio I had to play 6 bars of his part. Last of all, I played the last cassation in B, Kerschel number 287. And they all stared. I played as if I were the greatest fiddler in Europe. October 6, 1777. Herr Albert, who took great interest in Wolfgang, far beyond merely entertaining him, made him a proposal which might render it possible for him to remain in Munich. He promised to bring 10 friends together, who should each contribute 1 ducat a month, or 600 florins a year. It would be easy to get commissions from Count Siau, which would raise his income to 800 florins. "What do you think of this idea?" writes Wolfgang, overjoyed. "Is it not an act of friendship? And should I not accept it, if it is really in earnest?" There was the immediate future to be provided for, and for this he was assured that the concerts would begin in November and last until May. One was given in Herr Albert's hall every Saturday, and then strangers came to the town. If he only stayed now, he was quite certain of an engagement. Wolfgang's mother thought well of this proposal, but his father, as a man of the world, had many scruples. October 4th, 1777. Herr Albert's proposition is indeed as great an act of friendship as one can imagine, but though it does not appear to have occurred to you, the difficulty to my mind will be to find the 10 people who are to give the ducat a month. Who are these philanthropists and lovers of music? What is their connection with you, and what services will they demand in return? I do not see where they are to come from. Herr Albert would scarcely be able to speak to them all without delay. Some of them may be away from Munich. For myself, I should prefer mercantile men to noblemen. It all depends upon whether they keep their word, and for how long. If the thing is feasible, well and good. It ought to be accepted. But unless it can be settled at once, you cannot stay there spending money and losing time, for no profit is to be expected in Munich, in spite of all their compliments and promises. He turned out to be right. The 10 philanthropists and lovers of music did not come forward, and Wolfgang had to submit more than once to reproaches for his readiness to believe in fires of straw which burn up quickly and end in smoke. But even without such aid, Wolfgang thought he might maintain himself in Munich for the present. October 2nd, 1777. It would not be impossible for me to get on alone. I should get at least 300 florins from Count Siau. I need not concern myself as to my board. I should be always invited out, and even if I were not, nothing pleases Herr Albert more than my taking my meals with him. I should contract with Count Siau, on the advice of my best friends, to supply him yearly with 4 German operas, some buffe, some serie. Then if I had a sera, or benefit, on each, as is the custom here, that would give at least 500 florins, which would bring my income up to 800 florins, and probably more, for Rainer, a comedian and singer, took 200 florins for his sera, and I am a great favorite here. I should become a far greater if I helped to raise the German drama by my music. Mozart had clearly some confidence in his own powers. He did not think it much to offer to write 4 German operas every year, and a salary of 300 gulden did not strike him as being poor pay for the work. But Count Siau appears to have been too prudent to risk even so much as this, and Leopold Mozart was still less inclined to consent to a plan which based all of its calculations on future and uncertain profits, and would not redound to Wolfgang's honor. "You might certainly manage to live alone in Munich," he wrote, October 6, 1777, "but what good would this do you? How the Archbishop would sneer! You can do that anywhere else as easily as in Munich. You must not make little of your talents and throw yourself away. There is certainly no need for that." Wolfgang's sister was of the same opinion. "It would be no honor to you to remain in Munich without any official position. It would be better to seek one at some other court. You will soon find it." The father desired, therefore, that they should leave Munich as soon as possible. Fine words and bravissimos pay neither the postboy nor the host. As soon as you find there is nothing to be got, you had better move on." The good friends he had made might go on working for him in his absence, and preparing the way for a future position for him. He suggested this to Count Cial, as he tells his father, October 3rd, 1777. "I have come to explain my affairs correctly to your Excellency. I have been told that I ought to travel in Italy. I was 16 months in Italy, and wrote 3 operas, as is well known. What happened further your Excellency will see by these documents." I showed him the diplomas. "I lay all this before your Excellency, in order that if there is any talk of me, and any injustice done me, your Excellency may be able to set it right." He asked me if I was going to France now. I said I should remain in Germany. He thought I meant Munich, and said with a joyful laugh, "What? You are going to remain here?" I said, "No, I should like to have stayed, and to tell the truth, I only sought service under the Elector in order that I might supply your Excellency with my compositions, and that without any personal interest. I should have taken pleasure in it." Whereupon he pushed back his nightcap. This, then, was the end of all the fine promises and honors. But other prospects were open to Wolfgang during his stay in Munich, which excited his liveliest interest. Myslivicek, his Italian friend, had produced at the Carnival in Munich his opera Ezio, and during Lent his oratorio Abramo di Sacco, both with astonishing success. He was engaged for the next Carnival at Naples, and only kept in Munich by illness. He gave Wolfgang prospects of a scrittura in Naples, and wrote a letter on his behalf to the impresario Don Gaetano Santorio. Mozart, with his inexpressible longing to write an opera once more, wrote joyfully to his father, October 10th, 1777. "I have my 100 ducats certain in the Carnival, and, when I have once written at Naples, I shall be in request everywhere. As you know, in summer and autumn there is an opera buffa to be picked up here and there, which will do to keep one's hand in. It is true that one does not make much, but it is always something, and one gains more honor and credit than by 100 concerts in Germany. I am more pleased, too, because I have to compose, which is my sole passion and delight. Then, if I obtain service, or the hope of it, the scrittura will be a great recommendation. I speak exactly as I feel from my heart, and if you can prove to me that I am wrong, I shall be ready, although unwillingly, to submit. For, if I only hear the name of an opera, I am quite beside myself." But the father was not against it, and only thought that this interlude must not cause the main object of the journey to be lost sight of. He therefore corresponded with Myslivicek, but soon observed that the latter only mentioned the scrittura when he had some favor to ask for himself. In point of fact, nothing came of this proposal. The same ill success attended the father's effort to obtain for Wolfgang a commission to write an opera for the Feast of the Ascension in Venice. The impresario Michele dall'Agata returned no answer to 2 letters addressed to him, February 12, 1778. On October 11th the travelers left Munich, and reached Augsburg the same evening. Following Leopold Mozart's minute directions, they established themselves at the Lamb in the Kreuzgasse, where you pay 30 kreuzers for dinner, get nice rooms and good society, English, French, etc. Wolfgang was well received by his uncle, and contracted a close friendship with his lively cousin MaryAnn, which may have compensated in some degree for the coldness of his reception generally in his father's native town. In obedience to his father's strict injunctions, he waited at once upon his Grace, the town councillor von Langen-Mantel, with whom Leopold Mozart had been well acquainted in former years. But Wolfgang gained little encouragement from this audience, of which he gives his father the following account. End of section 37, chapter 16, part 1. Section 38 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1, by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Mozart by Otto JAHN, Section 38, Chapter 16, Part 2. My first visit was to the town councillor, Master Longotto Barro. My cousin, a dear good man and an honest citizen, accompanied me, and had the honor of waiting in the anteroom like a lackey until I came out from the arch-town councillor. I did not fail to begin by presenting my father's humble respects. He was pleased to remember all about it, and asked me, "How has the gentleman been all this time?" To which I answered, "God be praised, quite well. I hope that your health has also been good." Afterwards he was still more polite, and said, "Sir," and I said, "Your Grace," as I had all along. Nothing would satisfy him but that I should go up with him to his son-in-law on the 2nd floor, and my cousin waiting on the steps all the while. It was with difficulty that I refrained from saying something with all my politeness. Upstairs I had the honor of playing for 3/4 of an hour upon a good clavichord, by Stein, in the presence of the stiff and starched son of his long-necked, gracious lady-wife, and her silly old mother. I played fantasias, and then everything he had, prima vista, among others some very pretty pieces by a certain Edelman. They were all exceedingly polite, and I was exceedingly polite, for it is my custom to be to people as I find them. It is the best way. The next visit was to the celebrated organ and clavier maker, George Andreas Stein, 1728 to 1792. The father conceived the idea that Wolfgang should present himself to Stein under a feigned name, and should pretend that he came from Innsbruck with a commission to inspect some instruments. Such a joke was quite to Wolfgang's mind, and he told his father how it had passed. During his visit to the town councillor he had expressed his intention of calling upon Stein for dinner. The younger gentleman thereupon volunteered to accompany me. I thanked him for his kindness, and promised to come at 2 o'clock. I came, and we set out in company with his brother-in-law, who looks exactly like a student. Although I had begged them not to say who I was, Herr von Langenmantel blurted out, "I have the honor to introduce you to a virtuoso on the clavier." I protested, and said I was an unworthy disciple of Herr Ziegel, of Munich, by whom I was charged with many compliments, etc. He shook his head, and at last said, "Have I the honor of seeing Herr Mozart?" "Oh no," said I, "my name is Tretzam, and I have a letter to you." He took the letter and was going to open it. I did not give him time, and said, "Why should you read the letter now? Let us go into the hall and see your pianofortes, which I am most curious to do." "With all my heart, but I do not think I am deceived." He opened the door of his showroom. I ran to one of the 3 claviers which stood there. I played. He could scarcely take time to open the letter, his curiosity was so excited. He read only the signature. "Oh!" he screamed, and embraced me, and crossed himself, and made grimaces, and was altogether very delighted. Mozart, for his part, was equally delighted with Stein's pianofortes, of which he gives his father the following detailed account. "Before I had seen Stein's work, I preferred Späth's claviers to all others, but now I must give the preference to Stein's, for they mute much better than Späth's. If I strike hard, whether I raise my finger or not, the sound passes the instant I have heard it. I may come upon the keys as I like, the tone is always the same. It does not block, it neither becomes stronger nor weaker, nor does it cease altogether. In a word, it is all equal. Such a pianoforte, it is true, cannot be had under 300 florins, but the trouble and labor bestowed on it are inestimable. His hammers fall the instant the keys are struck, whether they are held down or not. When such an instrument is finished, he told me himself, he sits down and tries all sorts of passages, runs, and jumps, and works away until he is satisfied. He often said, if I were not such a passionate lover of music myself, and were not able to play a little on the clavier, I should long ago have lost patience with my work, but I am a lover of instruments which do not tax the player, and which wear well. And his claviers do wear well. He guarantees that the sounding board shall not spring. When a sounding board is ready for a piano, he exposes it to air, rain, snow, sun, so that it may warp, and then he puts on slips and glues them down, so that it is all strong and true. He is glad when it warps, because then he is sure that nothing more will happen. He has 3 such pianofortes finished. I have played upon them again today. The pedal, which is pressed by the knee, is better managed by him than by others. If I only just touch it, it acts, and when the knee is removed, there is not the least vibration. Mozart knew how to make the most of these improved instruments. His playing and his intelligent admiration so won Stein's approbation that the latter followed the advice Wolfgang gave him concerning the education of his daughter. MaryAnn Stein, born 1769, was the prodigy of Augsburg. In April 1776 she had played her first concerto to universal admiration, and had received a beautiful medal from the town nobility. Wolfgang's criticism on her playing to his father, October 24, 1777, is somewhat severe, but so important as showing his views on pianoforte playing in general that it must be given entire. The memory of the excellent Frau Nanette Streicher will not suffer from the bold criticism of the young Mozart. Apropos of his daughter, whoever sees her and hears her without laughing must be as much of a stone, Stein, as her father himself. She sits right up in the treble instead of in the middle of the instrument, so that she may be better able to move about and make grimaces. Her eyes roll, and she simpers and smirks. If a thing comes twice over, it is played slower the second time, and if a third time, it is slower still. The arm goes high, up in the air when a passage comes, and the emphasis is given by the whole arm instead of the finger, clumsily and heavily. But the best of all is when, in a passage that ought to flow like oil, the fingers have to be changed. It makes no difference at all to her, but when the time comes, up goes her hand, and she begins again quite calmly, so that one is always in expectation of a wrong note, which makes the effect very striking. I only write all this to give you some idea of what clavier playing and teaching may be brought to. I leave you to make your own use of the hints. Herr Stein is quite infatuated over his daughter. She is 8½ years old and learns everything by heart. She may turn out something. She has genius, But as she is going on at present, she will not turn out anything. She will never gain fluency, because she is doing all she can to make her hand heavy. She will never learn the most difficult and most necessary part of music, that is, time, because she has been accustomed from her earliest youth to play out of time. Herr Stein and I had at least 2 hours' talk on this point. I think I nearly converted him, and now he asks my advice about everything. He was quite infatuated in Bicca. Now he sees and hears that I play better than Bicca, that I make no grimaces, and yet play with so much expression that I show off his pianofortes better than anyone. The correctness of my time astonishes them all. The tempo rubato in an adagio, with the left hand keeping strict time, was quite past their comprehension. They always follow with the left hand. The expressions about Bicca, who was considered among the best pianoforte players, are only repetition of what was said on all sides. Count Wolfegg and several others who are very enthusiastic for Bicca said lately at a public concert that I had thrown Bicca quite into the shade, writes Wolfgang in confirmation of his own opinion. Even Archbishop Hieronymus was reported to have said aside to his favorites that Bicca was a charlatan and a Merry Andrew, and that Mozart far surpassed him. June 29, 1778. He played a tolerably different sonata by Bicca, Prima Vista, Miserabile al solito. How the Kapellmeister Graf and the organist Schmidhauer crossed themselves over the performance may be better imagined than described. Mozart's organ and violin playing created quite as much astonishment as his performances on the clavier. When I told Herr Stein that I should like to play upon his organ in the Barfußerkirche, for that I had a passion for the organ, he was greatly astonished and said, "What? A man like you, a clavier player, willing to play on an instrument which has no douceur, no expression, which allows of neither piano nor forte, but goes on always the same?" "All that has nothing to do with it. To my mind, the organ is the king of all instruments." "Well, do as you like." So we went together. I could guess by his way of talking that he did not expect me to do his organ much credit. He thought I should play clavier fashion. He told me how he had taken Schobert to the organ according to his request. "And I was sorry," said he, "for Schobert had told everybody, and the church was full. I had imagined the fellow would be full of spirit, fire, and rapidity, and that would tell on the organ. But as soon as he began I changed my opinion. I only said, 'What do you think, Herr Stein? Are you afraid that I shall come to grief on the organ?' 'Ah, you, that is quite different.' We went into the choir. I began to prelude, at which he laughed with delight. Then followed a fugue. 'I can well believe,' said he, 'that you enjoy playing the organ, when you play like that.' At first I did not quite understand the pedal because it was not divided. It began C, then D, E in a row. With us D and E are above, where E flat and F sharp are here, but I soon grew accustomed to it. He played the organ also in the monastery of St. Ulrich, which had the dreadful steps, and often visited the monastery of the Holy Cross, where he was invited to dine on October 19th and entertained with music during the meal, October 21st, 1777. However badly they may play, yet I prefer the music of the monastery to the Augsburg orchestra. I played a symphony in the violin concerto in B flat by Van Hall with universal applause. The dean is a good, jolly fellow. He is a cousin of Eberlin's, named Zeschinger, and remembers Papa very well. In the evening at supper I played the Strasbourg concerto, Kochel No. 219. It went as smooth as oil. They all praised the beautiful pure tone. Afterwards a little clavichord was brought in. I preluded and played a sonnet, and the Fischer variations. Then someone whispered to the dean that he should hear me play organ fashion. I said he might give me a theme, but he would not. So one of the monks did. I led off with it, and in the middle, the fugue was in G minor, I began in the major, in a playful style but in the same time, and then came back to the theme. At last it occurred to me that I might use the playful style for the theme of the fugue. Without more ado I tried it, and I went as accurately as if it had been measured for by Daser, the Salzburg tailor. The dean was quite beside himself. "I could never have believed it," said he. "You are a wonderful man. My abbot told me that he had never in his life heard such correct and solemn organ playing." The abbot had heard me 2 or 3 days before, when the dean was not there. Finally someone brought a sonata which was fugued for me to play. But I said, "Gentlemen, this is too much. I must acknowledge that I cannot play this sonata at once." "I think so too," said the dean eagerly, for he was quite on my side. "That is too much. It would be impossible for anyone." "Still," said I will try it." And all the time I played I heard the dean calling out behind me, "Oh, you rascal! Oh, you young scamp!" I played until 11 o'clock. They bombarded me with themes for fugues, and laid siege to me on all sides. In return for his kind reception and the pleasure expressed in his playing, Wolfgang presented the Abbot Bartholomew Christa, 1760 to 1780, with several compositions, the Masses in F, Kochel No. 192, in C, Kochel No. 220, and the Misericordias Domini, number 222, refers to them in writing to his father, as well as to the Litany De Venerabili, November 20th, 1777. What has become of this last we do not know. In spite of all this applause from connoisseurs, the prospects of a concert were not good. At first a brilliant reception was expected. Herr von Langenmantel, son of the town councillor, had taken the matter into his own hands and promised to arrange a chamber concert for the Patrici only. But some days later he invited Wolfgang, and after he had played as long as the company pleased, explained to him that the concert could not take place, since the Patrici were not in funds. As if this were not enough, the Patrici thought fit to make sport of him at table. In accordance with his father's advice that he should ensure respect and consideration for himself in places where there was no reigning prince, by wearing the order conferred on him by the great Pope Ganganelli, Wolfgang wore the cross of his order at Augsburg. This was made an occasion for mockery, and one officer in particular, Bach by name, was so rude and insulting that Wolfgang lost patience, and repaid him in kind, calling him Herr von Kurzmantel. But he does not seem ever to have worn the order again. He had promised to attend, and perhaps to play at, the weekly concert given during the winter months by a society of noblemen, both Catholic and Protestant. But, indignant at the treatment he had received, he declared he would only give a concert for a few invited friends and connoisseurs. They were Catholic nobles, however, who had insulted him, and Stein set in motion the evangelical, not Lutheran, as Leopold Mozart reminds his son, nobles, who made such friendly overtures that he attended a concert given by the peasant nobles, and played one of his symphonies, taking the violin himself, and then a concerto and a sonata. Compliments and eulogies were heaped upon him, and finally 2 ducats were presented to him. Wolfgang's father thought him far too yielding. "One thing is very certain," he writes, October 20th, 1777, "they would not have found me at their beggarly concert." In the meantime, through the exertions of his friends, a public concert was given on October 22nd. What do you think came next after the symphony? The concerto for 3 claviers, number 242. Herr Demmler played the first, I the second, and Herr Stein the third. Then I played alone the last sonata in D, number 284. Then my concerto in B flat, number 238. Then a fugue in C minor, and a splendid sonata in C major out of my own head, with a rondo at the end. There was tremendous noise and confusion. Herr Stein made one grimace after another for delight. Herr Demmler actually laughed. This eccentric being always laughs when anything pleases him. This time he began to swear. Count Wolfgang ran about the room, saying, "I never heard anything like it in my life." He said to me, "I must tell you that I never heard you play so well as today. I will tell your father so as soon as I get to Salzburg." Leopold Mozart's heart was rejoiced by a wonderfully fine article in the newspaper, probably from the pen of Herr von Sabnesnig, of whose charming poetry he had reminded Wolfgang. On the other hand, the receipts of the concert were small, considering that he had put forth all his powers, 90 gulden, with 16 gulden 30 kreutzers expenses. Wolfgang was not tempted to retract what he had written to his father in anger about the behavior of the aristocrats, October 16th, 1777. "I must say that if I had not found such good and charming cousins, I should repent ever having set foot in Augsburg. I must tell you something about my dear little cousin, but I will wait till tomorrow, for I ought to be in good spirits to praise her as she deserves. Early on the 17th, I shall write and assure you that our little cousin is pretty, sensible, charming, clever, and merry. She knows something of the world, having been in Munich some time. We two suit each other exactly, for she is just a little wicked. We laugh at everybody and have great fun." Defending his cousin against a slighting expression of his father's, Wolfgang says, "Yesterday, to please me, she dressed à la Française, and looked 5% prettier." He gave her his portrait in a little medallion, and made her promise to be painted in French costume. A mournful parting ended this happy visit, Stein having written to Wolfgang's father in the most eulogistic manner concerning his son's performances. At the next quoit-playing meeting in Salzburg, there appeared on the quoit a representation of "the sad adieu of 2 persons dissolved in tears, Wolfgang and his cousin." The quoit was charming, wrote the father, November 17th, 1777. An Augsburg maiden stood at the right and presented a young man in top boots, equipped for travelling, and in the other hand she carried a wonderful linen cloth trailing on the ground, with which she dried her eyes. The gentleman had a similar cloth, which he was putting to the same use, and he held his hat in his other hand. Written above were 6 lines of poetry, expressive of the sorrowful emotions of the young couple. This good-humoured participation in the little adventures of his son stands in striking and effective contrast to the earnest care which breathes from a letter addressed to Wolfgang on his fête day, October 31st. "I must wish you happiness on your fête day, but what more can I wish for you than I am always wishing? I wish that the grace of God may be with you everywhere, and never forsake you as long as you are diligent in performing the duties of a true Catholic Christian. You know me, and know that I am no pedant, no canting hypocrite. But you will not refuse your father one prayer. This is that you will have such concern for your soul that you may cause your father no anguish on his deathbed in the thought that he has been careless of the things which concern your salvation. Farewell. Be happy, be wise. Honor and cherish your mother, who is troubled in her old age for your sake. Love me as I love you. Your faithful, anxious father. The son's answer is in the tone of reverence which it becomes children to adopt on such occasions to their parents. I kiss your hand and thank you humbly for your good wishes on my fête day. Have no concern for me. I have God ever before my eyes. I acknowledge his omnipotence. I fear his anger. But I also acknowledge his love, his mercy and pity towards his creatures. He will never forsake his servants. I submit myself wholly to his will, and so it cannot fail, I must be happy and content. I shall also be diligent to follow the commands and the counsel which you are so good as to give me. On October 26, Wolfgang and his mother left Augsburg, and proceeded by way of Dunavert and Nordlingen to Hohenaltheim, the residence of the Prince von Edding-Wallerstein. Music was held in high honor at this little court. Not only were celebrated performers, such as Janich, the violinist, Reicha, the violoncellist, Perwein, the oboist, etc., encouraged to settle there, but the whole orchestra was distinguished for its delicacy of execution. Rossetti, the conductor, had carried his observance of the most delicate gradations of tone, sometimes to the bounds of pedantry. Ignaz von Bieke, captain in a Württemberg dragoon regiment, was manager of the court music, and himself a distinguished clavier player and composer. The prince, a handsome young man, who had formerly invited Wolfgang to visit him in Naples, was suffering from an attack of melancholy and unable to bear music. But the Mozarts were obliged to remain several days at Hohenaltheim on account of the mother's severe cold. A rumor reached Leopold Mozart that Wolfgang had been playing the buffoon there, that he had danced about playing the violin, and had gained the reputation of being a wild, merry fellow. He considered that this would afford Bieke, who was jealous of Wolfgang, an excellent opportunity of depreciating his powers as an artist. January 26, 1778. Wolfgang gave a decided contradiction to this report. He had sat at the officers' table with all due honor, and had not said a word to anyone, when with Bieke, too, he had been quite serious. Bieke had received him kindly, had promised him advice and support should he ever go to Paris, and had heard him play. They had talked about Vienna, too, and agreed that the Emperor Joseph was a fair executant, but not a true lover of music. Bieke said that he had only played fugues and such like trifles before him, and that he had heard music in the Emperor's cabinet which was enough to frighten the very dogs away. They also confided to each other that music gave them both the headache. Only good music had this effect with Bieke, and bad with Mozart. The travelers entered Mannheim on October 30th. Their stay was longer than they had intended, and although the hopes with which it opened were not destined to be fulfilled, yet the months passed in Mannheim were fruitful in their effect on Wolfgang's development, both musical and moral. The Elector, Karl Theodor, had studied in his early youth under the Jesuits, and had then visited the universities of Leyden and Leuven, displaying a great taste for science, poetry, art, and music, the last of which he practised himself. The extravagance with which he lavished on his court and on his park of Schwetzingen, the Versailles of the Palatinate, was carried also in some degree into the affairs of science and art. End of section 38. Chapter 16, Part 2. Section 39 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1, by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Mozart by Otto JAHN, Section 39, Chapter 17, Part 1. The Palatinate Academy of Science, founded in 1763, encouraged historical and scientific research. Collections of pictures and engravings, and an exhibition of plaster casts from the antique, at that time the only and much thought-of collection of the kind in Germany, served in connection with an academy to encourage the formative arts. And a German society, founded in Mannheim by the Elector in 1775, proved the desire of its members to take their share in the new impulse which German literature had then received. Klopstock's presence in this year had not been without its influence. Not content with native authors, such as Gemmingen, Klein, Dahlberg, the painter Müller, the Elector sought, but in vain, to attract acknowledged celebrities, such as Lessing and Wieland. His zealous cooperation was given to the plan of founding a German drama in the place of the usual French one. The National Theatre was built, and efforts were made to retain Lessing as a dramatist and Eckhoff as an actor. When this failed, the engagement of Marchand secured them at least a first-rate actor. But music was incontestably the peculiar province of Mannheim, the paradise of musicians. Here, too, patriotic feeling was supreme. Original German operas took the place of the grand Italian opera, with its appendage of translated comic opera, generally borrowed from the French. The performances of the Seiler Company of Actors, which had come to Weimar in the autumn of 1771 in the place of the Koch Company, suggested to Weiland the idea of a grand, serious German opera, in addition to the operettas, which had met with so much success. His Alcestis was intended as an important step in this direction, as is proved by his Letters on the German Opera of Alcestis, which, by their comparison of himself with Euripides, called forth Goethe's burlesque. His opera met with ready acknowledgment, but at the same time with severe and deserved blame. It was thought to be too evidently fashioned after Metastasio's pattern, both in plan and treatment, and to be wanting in dramatic interest, true passion, and lively characteristic. The public found the opera tedious and trivial, and took just umbrage at the conception of Hercules as a virtuous humdrum citizen. Weiland found in Schweitzer an ideal composer, who identified himself with the poet, who could be silent when the poet wished to speak alone, but who hastened to aid him at need with all the resources of musical art. A composer, too, who thought more of producing a true impression on the mind of his hearers than of flattering their ears, inciting their curiosity, or even adhering too closely to the mechanical rules of his art. Weiland was not content with placing Schweitzer on a level with the best Italian composers. In a letter to Klein, he speaks of Gluck's Alceste as a divine work, but does not hesitate to declare Schweitzer's composition to be the best that had ever been heard of the kind. Schweitzer's music was in fact much applauded, and he was judged to have accomplished more than the poet. His efforts after a true and forcible musical expression of emotion, and after originality, are worthy of all praise, and phrases here and there, particularly in the accompanied recitative, are of charming effect, while the orchestra is carefully treated, and not at all after the usual manner of Italian opera. On the other hand, he has been justly blamed for his slavish adherence to the old form of the aria, with da capo, middle passage, bravura passages, and ritornello. He is unequal, too, and his effects are all those of detail. What is wanting is genius, original power of creation, which forms details into one great whole, and produces something altogether new and complete. This was felt by Zelter and by Mozart, who wrote to his father that the best part of Schweitzer's melancholy Alceste, besides the beginnings, middles, and endings of some of the songs, was the beginning of the recitative O Jugendzeit, and the worst, together with the greater part of the opera, was the overture. This consists of 2 movements, an adagio and a fugue, which are both unimportant and commonplace. Alceste was first performed in Weimar on May 28, 1773, and frequently repeated, always with the greatest success. This was also the case in Gotha and Frankfurt, and on August 13, 1775, Karl Theodor produced the opera with great brilliancy at Schwetzingen. The success was great, and it was considered as marking an epoch that a German opera written by a German poet, composed by a German musician, and sung by German artists, should be produced successfully by a German prince. In the following summer, Weiland received a commission to write a new opera, which Schweitzer was to compose under his immediate direction. The way being once cleared, it was easy to take further steps in the same direction. The Elector hit upon the idea of representing scenes from the national history in German musical dramas. Professor Anton Klein, formerly a Jesuit, and always one of the most zealous supporters of the patriotic struggle then proceeding, wrote for this purpose Gunther von Schwarzburg, which was composed by Holzbauer and performed on January 5th in the magnificent opera house, with all the expenses guaranteed. Schubart had anticipated with joy the glorious revolution in taste, and the applause was great, although the success was not so deep and lasting as might have been expected. The critics found much in the text at which to take exception. Weiland shrank from speaking in the Mercury about this so-called opera, for fear lest, absurd as it might appear, his criticism might be taken for envy. An evident effort is made to give the work a deeper tone than one of mere patriotic sentiment, but in spite of the exalted emotion and the passion of the words and music, and of all that could be done in the way of scenic accessories, the opera was too wanting in dramatic treatment and characterization to take very deep root. The phraseology is an imitation of Klopstock, but the effort after force and originality is so clumsily made that Weiland's contempt is justified. Of the music, it was said by the minister Hompesch that the predominant feeling and ideas were neither French nor Italian, but genuinely German. Schubart praised its mixture of German feeling and foreign grace, and other critics spoke of its stamp of genius and its gentle grace. Mozart, who saw the opera the day after his arrival at Mannheim, wrote to his father, November 16, 1777, Holzbauer's music is very fine, far too good for the poetry. I am amazed at the spirit of so old a man as Holzbauer. for you would not believe the amount of fire in his music. The force and animation of Holzbauer's music are still apparent, though it is wanting in elevation and true musical sentiment. He has not attained to original dramatic characterization except in single touches, more especially in the recitatives. He never deviates from the customary Italian form, but the adaptation of this form to German song was in itself considered a remarkable innovation. The most distinguished vocalists, male and female, of the Mannheim Opera were, thanks to Holzbauer's excellent school of music, almost all Germans. Among them was Dorothea Wendling, née Spumi, 1737 to 1811, quote, the German Melpomene of Mannheim's golden age, unquote, who excited universal admiration by her perfect and expressive singing. According to Weiland, she surpassed even Mara, and he found in her his ideal of song as the language of the mind and the heart, every note being the living expression of the purest and most ardent emotion, and the whole song a continuous thread of beauty. Her beauty, Heinz saw in her countenance all that was caressing, soft, and feminine, combined with the glow and animation of a passionate nature, and her excellent acting elevated her performances to a very high point. Her sister-in-law, Elizabeth Auguste Wendling, née Sarzelli, 1746 to 1786, though less famous and hindered by continued ill health, was nevertheless a praiseworthy singer, while Franziska Danzi, 1756 to 1791, married afterwards to the oboist Lebrun, was an artist of the first rank in her beauty and the compass of her voice, as well as in her thorough musical cultivation. At the time of Mozart's visit to Mannheim, she was in London on leave of absence. But the fame of these youthful singers was far surpassed by that of the now elderly tenor Anton Raff. He was born in 1714 at the village of Holzem, not far from Bonn, and was educated at the Jesuit seminary in Bonn. He had a beautiful voice, and the ease with which he sang by ear made it a great labor to him to learn his notes. The Elector Clemens August, who heard him sing in church, provided for his education as a singer, and gave him a salary of 200 thalers. After causing him to study a part in an oratorio, the Elector took him to Munich, where he was engaged by Ferrandini to appear in opera. This led to his going to study at Bologna under Bemacchi, from whose severe school he came forth as one of the finest tenor singers of the century. He sang in 1738 at Florence at the wedding of Maria Theresa, left Italy in 1742 to return to Bonn, where his salary was raised to 750 florins, and sang at different German courts. In 1749 he performed in Jommelli's Didone at Vienna, to Metastasio's great satisfaction. After a short stay in Italy, he repaired in 1752 to Lisbon for 3 years, and from thence in 1755 to Madrid, where he lived in close friendship with his musical director, Farinelli. In 1759 they went together to Naples. Here, it is said, his singing made so deep an impression on the Princess Belmonte Pignatelli as to cure her of a deep melancholy into which she had been thrown by the death of her husband. On his return to Germany in 1770, the Elector Karl Theodor besought him to enter his service, on which Raff modestly declared that he should esteem himself happy if the Elector would be content with the small remnant of his powers which was left to him. His voice was of the finest tenor quality that could be heard, from the deepest to the highest notes, even, clear, and full. With a perfect mastery of the art of song displaying itself in his extraordinary power of singing at sight and of varying and introducing cadenzas, he combined a feeling delivery that seemed but an echo of his own good heart, and a clear deliberate judgment on things musical. Added to all this, his enunciation was so distinct that even in the largest hall not a syllable was lost. When Mozart first heard him in Gunther von Schwarzburg, his chief impression was that of an old man's failing strength. He writes, November 8, 1777, Herr Raff sang his 4 songs, and about 450 incidental bars, in such a manner as to show that it is want of voice which makes it so bad, unless one reminds oneself all the time that it is Raff, the old and celebrated tenor, who is singing, one cannot help laughing. As for myself, if I had not known it was Raff, I should have died of laughing. As it was, I took out my handkerchief and blew my nose. He never was, they tell me, anything of an actor. He should only be heard, not seen. His presence is not at all good. In the opera he has to die, singing a long, long, slow air. And he died with a smiling mouth, his voice falling so at the end as to be quite inaudible. I was sitting in the orchestra next to Wendling, the flute player, and I remarked that it was unnatural to expect a man to go on singing till he fell down dead. Never mind, said I. A little patience, and it will soon be over. I think it will, said he, and laughed. After hearing him oftener, Mozart did more justice to Raff's artistic skill, but he always thought his style wanting in simplicity. In a letter from Paris, June 12, 1778, He pronounces a more detailed judgment, true to his convictions, yet anxious not to wrong the excellent man of whom he was extremely fond. At his debut in the Concert Spirituel, here he sang Bach's Scena, Non so donde viene, which is my favorite song. I never heard him sing it before, and he pleased me. His style suits the song, but the style in itself, that of the Bernacchi school, is not at all to my taste. There is too much in it of cantabile. I grant that when he was younger and in his prime, the effect must have been sometimes quite startling. I like it, too, but there is too much of it. It is often ludicrous. What really pleases me is his singing of certain little things andantino, which he does in his own style. Everything in its place. I imagine that his forte was bravura singing, which gives him still, in spite of age, a good chest and a long breath. His voice is fine and very pleasant. If I shut my eyes when he is singing, I hear considerable resemblance to Meissner's, only Raff's voice is the pleasanter of the two. Meissner, as you know, has the bad habit of endeavoring to make his voice tremble. Raff never does this. He cannot bear it. But, as far as true cantabile is concerned, I like Meissner better than Raff, though he, too, according to my judgment, makes too much of it. In bravura passages and roulades, and in his good distinct utterance, Raff bears off the palm. All who saw Raff on the stage pronounced him to be no actor, but only a singer. In private, he preserved the serenity and moderation of an estimable and genuinely pious character. His moral conduct was faultless, his opinions earnest and severe. He had occasional fits of passion, but was for the most part good-humored and benevolent, a true and self-denying friend. No wonder that Mozart conceived a strong and lasting attachment to such a man as this. The most distinguished tenor-singer in Mannheim after Raff was his pupil Franz Hartig, born 1750. Church music in Mannheim did not stand on the same high level as the opera. Schubart complains that little attention was paid to the true church style, and that the old masses were despised and the new ones introduced in the most effeminate and mincing operatic style. Even Holzbauer's sacred compositions were far inferior to his operas. Mozart heard a mass by Holzbauer, written 26 years ago but very good, as he writes to his father, November 4th, 1777. He writes well, in good church style, with fine passages for the voices and instruments. Notwithstanding, he was far from pleased with the Mannheim church music on the whole, and did not care, as he writes in the same letter, to have one of his own masses performed there. Why? On account of their brevity. No, for everything here is short. On account of their church style? Not at all. But only because, under present circumstances, it is necessary to write principally for the instruments, since nothing more wretched than the vocal department can be conceived. 6 soprani, 6 alti, 6 tenori, and 6 bassi to 20 violins and 12 basses stand just in the proportion of 0 to 1, do they not, Herr Bullinger? They have only 2 male sopranos, and both old. Just dying out. The soprano prefers singing the alto part, because his upper notes are gone. The few boys that they have are wretched, and the tenors and basses are like singers at a funeral. The organ was still worse provided for, and Mozart pulls out the full measure of his scorn on the 2 court organists. They have 2 organists here, for whose sake alone it would be worth taking the journey to Mannheim. I had a good opportunity of hearing them, for it is the custom here to omit the Benedictus, and for the organist to go on playing instead. The first time I heard the second organist, and the next time the first. But I have a better opinion of the second than of the first. When I heard him, I asked, "Who is at the organ?" "Our second organist." "He plays wretchedly." When I heard the other, I asked, "Who is that?" "Our first organist." "He plays more wretchedly still." I suppose if they were shaken up together, the result would be something worse still. It makes one die of laughing to see them. The second goes to the organ like a child to the mud. He shows his trade in his face. The first wears spectacles. I stood at the organ and watched him for the sake of instruction. He lifts his hands high up at every note. His tour de force is the use of the sext stop, but he oftener uses the quint or the octave stop. He often playfully lets fall the right hand, and plays only with the left. In a word, he does as he likes. He is so far completely master of his instrument. But Mannheim was distinguished most particularly for its instrumental music, the orchestra being unanimously considered the finest in Europe. It was more numerous and better appointed, especially as to wind instruments, than was customary at the time. It was here that Mozart first became acquainted with the clarinet as an orchestral instrument. "Oh, if we only had clarinetti," he writes, December 3rd, 1778. "You cannot think what a splendid effect a symphony makes with flutes, oboes, and clarinets." Burney had only one fault to find, a fault common to all orchestras of the day, that is, the occasionally defective intonation of the wind instruments. The Mannheim orchestra was not only well appointed and strong, but uniform and certain in execution, with delicate gradations of tone, until then unknown. Piano and forte were rendered in the most varied degrees. Crescendo and diminuendo were first invented at Mannheim, and for a long time other orchestras made no attempt at imitation. Other means, too, such as the skillful blending of the wind and stringed instruments, were made the most of to produce a well-arranged, finely gradationed whole. The excellence of the Mannheim Orchestra, whose performances excited as much admiration among contemporaries as those of the Paris Orchestra under Habeneck's conductorship in our own time, gained for it the honor of taking a regular share in the Elector's concerts. The band contained some of the first artists and virtuosi of the day, such as Cannabich, Toschke, Kramer, Stamitz, and Franzl among the violins, Wendling as a flute player, Lebrun and Ramm as oboists, Ritter as bassoonist, and Lang as horn player. But its fame rested chiefly on the excellent discipline of the orchestra, which, among so many first-rate artists, it was no easy task to maintain. The Kapellmeister at the time of Mozart's visit was Christian Cannabich, 1731 to 1798, who had succeeded Stamitz in 1775. His compositions were doubtless overrated by his contemporaries, but he was admirable as a solo violinist, and still better as an orchestral leader, besides being an excellent teacher. The majority of the violinists in the Mannheim Orchestra had issued from his school, and to this was mainly owing the uniformity of their execution and delivery. Cannabich, who was more of an organizer than an originator, had experimented with every condition and device for producing instrumental effects, and he laid special stress on technical perfection of execution in order to ensure good tutti players. Uniting, as he did, intelligence and a genius for direction to, quote, a true German heart, unquote, and a moral and temperate life, he possessed the confidence and esteem of his musicians, and was therefore the better able to bring their performances to the highest excellence. End of Section 39, Chapter 17, Part 1.
Section 40 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1, by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by MaryAnn Spiegel. The Life of Mozart, by Otto JAHN. Section 40, Chapter 17, Part 2. The many-sidedness of musical performances in Mannheim had helped to form a very original taste, and Karl Theodor himself was careful to encourage composers and virtuosi of all kinds. The groundwork both of thought and instruction was Italian certainly, but the fact that the care of musical affairs was intrusted to German musicians had an influence of its own, even before the national element had asserted its supremacy in Germany. French influence, too, made itself felt side by side with the Italian. The connection maintained by the Elector Palatine with the court of Versailles was profitable in every way to his musicians. Finally, the partiality for instrumental music, which we have already noted, must have tended to give an independent impulse to musical production in Mannheim. His stay in a town so thoroughly and genuinely musical must have had a more abiding effect upon Mozart than was exercised by Salzburg, Augsburg, or even Munich. He came to Mannheim at a time when the minds of men were full of fresh and eager aspirations after artistic and literary excellence, and fortunately for him the interest was mainly centered on his own peculiar province, the drama. We cannot imagine, however, that he was dazzled or abashed by the wealth of musical knowledge, or by the accomplishments of the noted musicians with whom he came in contact. His confidence in his own powers preserved him from any feeling of constraint or distrust. At first he was surprised at the small amount of attention which his presence excited. On the day after his arrival he made the acquaintance of the violinist, Christian Danner, born 1745, and went with him to rehearsal. I thought that I should not be able to keep from laughing when I was introduced to people. Some of them, who knew me per renommée, were polite and respectful, but the rest, who did not know anything of me, stared at me in the most ludicrous manner. They think because I am little and young that there can be nothing great or old in me, but they shall soon see. Mozart always resented, even in later years, any reference to his small stature and unimposing appearance, even when it was made by way of contrast to his great performances. His predictions were verified. It was not long before he gained the esteem and admiration of the Mannheim musicians. The ready goodwill with which he placed his talents and services at their disposal, and his cheerfulness and good breeding in society, rendering him a universal favorite. His spirits rose in proportion as the memory of his position at Salzburg faded from his mind. Even from Munich he wrote to his father, September 26, 1777, I am always in the best of spirits. I feel as light as a feather since I left all that chicanery behind. I am fatter, too, already." At Mannheim, in daily intercourse with cultivated artists, he must have felt completely at his ease. The members of the band were well paid and well treated. Carl Theodor's love of music and general affability gave them considerable freedom of position, and intercourse with their circle was liberal and pleasant. Schubert declares that the houses, tables, and hearts of all the musicians were open to him during the whole of his stay, and that he had his share in their practisings and their festivities. Mozart's experience was the same, although, his stay being longer, he could not fail to observe that the superficial frivolity of court life had affected the tone even of the artistic circles. His friendly reception by Cannabich led to an intimate friendship and daily intercourse with the whole family, in which Wolfgang's mother was included. He often dined with them, and no long time elapsed before he found himself al solito at supper, and spending the evenings with the Cannabichs. They chatted, played a little sometimes, or Wolfgang used to take a book out of his pocket and read. Occasionally the party became merrier and not quite so decorous, as the following mock confession made by Wolfgang to his father will show. November 14, 1777. I, Johannes Chrysostomus Amadeus Wolfgangus Sismundus Mozart, do hereby confess that both yesterday and the day before, and on various other occasions, I remained out until 12 o'clock at night, and that from 10 o'clock until the above-named hour I was at Cannabich's house, in company with Cannabich, his wife and daughter, Herr Schatzmeister, Herr Ramm, and Herr Lang, making rhymes and perpetuating bad jokes in thought and word, but not in deed. But I should not have conducted myself in so godless a fashion had not the ringleader of the sport, the above-named daughter, Liesel, incited and abetted me therein, and I must acknowledge that I found it extremely amusing. I bewail all these my sins and transgressions from the bottom of my heart, and, hoping to confess the same thing very frequently, I make an earnest resolution to amend my former sinful life. I therefore beg for a dispensation, that is, if it is an easy one. If not, it is all the same to me, for the game is not like to come to an end very soon. That Mozart was always ready when music was wanted we cannot doubt. On one of his first visits to Cannabich, he played all his 6 sonatas one after the other. Cannabich was not slow to recognize his extraordinary talent, nor to make use of it on occasion, as when Wolfgang made good clavier arrangements of his ballets for him. But self-interest had no share in the feelings with which he came to regard Wolfgang. Both he and his wife loved him as their own son, threw themselves zealously into all that concerned his well-being, and watched over him as true friends. The magnet which attracted Wolfgang to the house at first, and kept him chained there for a time, was Cannabich's oldest daughter, Rosa, who was then 13, a pretty, charming girl, as Wolfgang writes to his father, December 16, 1777. She has a staid manner and a great deal of sense for her age. She speaks but little, and when she does speak it is with grace and amiability. The day after his arrival, October 31st, she played something for him. He thought her playing good, and began to compose a sonata for her, as a mark of attention to Cannabich. The first allegro was ready on the same day. Young Danner asks me, he continues, what I meant to do for the Andante. I mean to make it exactly like Mademoiselle Rose herself. When I played it they were all wonderfully pleased. Young Danner said afterwards, "You were quite right, the Andante is exactly like her." On November 8 he wrote the rondo at Cannabich's. Consequently they would not let me away again. Mademoiselle Rose's talent gained in interest for him when, on studying the sonata with her, he found that it had been neglected. The right hand is very good, but the left is utterly ruined. If I were her regular master I would lay aside all music, cover the keys with a handkerchief, and make her practice passages, shakes, etc., first with the right hand and then with the left, slowly to begin with, until the hands were perfectly independent. After that I believe I should make an excellent player of her. The regular lessons followed in due time. He gave an hour daily to the young lady, and was very well satisfied with the result. Yesterday she gave me indescribable pleasure, he writes, December 6, 1777, by playing my sonata most beautifully. The Andante, a slow one, was full of feeling. She enjoys playing it. Her father thought the sonata wonderfully good, December 11, 1777. There was a little of the Mannheim affected taste in it, but not enough to spoil Wolfgang's own good style. Another musician with whom Mozart entered into very friendly relations was the distinguished flute player, Johann Wendling. Cannabich introduced him. Everyone was as polite as could be, he informs his father. The daughter, Augusta, who was at one time the Elector's mistress, plays the clavier well. Afterwards I played. I was in an excellent humor, and played everything out of my head, and 3 duets with the violin, which I had never seen before in my life, and the name of whose author I did not even know. They were all so delighted that I was obliged to kiss the ladies. I had no objection as far as the daughter was concerned, for she is not by any means ugly. He composed a French song for this Mademoiselle Gustel, of whom Wieland said that she was so like one of Raphael's or Carlo Dolce's Madonnas that he could hardly refrain from addressing a Salve Regina to her. She had given him the words, and her delivery of them was so charming that the song was called for every day at Wendling's, and they all raved about it. He promised to compose some more for her, and one at least was begun at a later time. An aria with a recitative was also sketched out for Dorothea Wendling, the mother, as she herself selected the words from Metastasio's Didone. Ah, non lasciarmi no, bel idol mio. And she, as well as her daughter, went wild over this song. It was Mozart's custom in sketching his songs to write out the bass entire, and even some indications of the accompaniment, so that the song could be sung and in some measure accompanied from the sketch. Whether this particular song was ever completed we do not know. Mozart did not forget Wendling himself. We are told that a concerto of his was rehearsed at Cannabich's, to which Mozart had arranged the instruments, November 22, 1777. He had a dislike to the flute and a mistrust of flute players, but he made an exception in favor of Wendling. When Wendling's brother teased him for this, he said, "Yes, but you see, it is quite another thing with your brother. He is not a piper, and one need not always be in terror for fear the next note should be too high or too low. He is always right, you see. His heart and his ear and the tip of his tongue are all in the right place, and he does not imagine that blowing and making faces is all that is needed. He knows, too, what adagio means." Wolfgang presented his oboe concerto to the oboist, Friedrich Ramm, born 1744, whom he met at Cannabich's, and who "went wild over it" November 4, 1777. He made it his cheval de bataille, playing it 5 times during the same winter, February 13, 1778, with great success, although it was known to be by me. Mozart soon became universally liked and admired, as well for his readiness and good nature in composing as for his performances on the organ and clavier, but we hear nothing more of his violin playing. He gave a humorous description to his father of the effect made by his organ playing soon after his arrival in Mannheim, November 13, 1777. Last Sunday I played the organ in the chapel for a joke. I came in during the Kyrie and played to the end of it, and, after the priest had given out the Gloria, I made a cadenza. Nothing like it had ever been heard here before, so that everybody looked round, especially Holzbauer. He said to me, "If I had only known I would have chosen another Mass." "Yes," said I, "in order to do for me altogether." Old Tesche, the concertmeister, and Wendling stood near me. The people were inclined to laugh, because every now and then, when I wanted a pizzicato effect, I gave little bangs to the notes. I was in my best humor. A voluntary is always played here instead of the Benedictus. I took the idea of the Sanctus and carried it out as a fugue. There they all stood and made faces. At the end, after the Missa Est, I played another fugue. The pedal is different from ours, and puzzled me a little at first, but I soon got used to it. When the new organ in the Lutheran church was tried, December 18, all the Kapellmeisters were invited, and Wolfgang's mother writes how a distinguished Lutheran came and invited him also. He admired the organ both in piano and in its single stops, but he disliked Vogler, who played it. He would not play much himself, only a prelude and a fugue, but he arranged to go again with a party of friends, and then he meant to have some rare fun on the organ. In the Reformed Church also, where the organ was considered a remarkably fine one, he played once to a friend for an hour and a half. The great admiration he excited as a clavier player is described by his mother, December 28, 1777. Wolfgang is made much of everywhere, but he plays quite differently from what he does at Salzburg, for there are nothing but pianofortes here, and you never heard anything like the way he manages them. In a word, every one that hears him declares that his equal is not to be found. Although Bekke has been here, as well as Schubart, they all agree that he surpasses them both in beauty of tone, in gusto and delicacy, and what they most admire is his playing out of his head whatever is laid before him. Clavier playing was less esteemed in Mannheim than proficiency on an orchestral instrument, and Peter Winter, a true representative of the Mannheim band, could not play the clavier at all, and could not abide such jingling noise, as he used to tell his friends. But Mozart had plenty of opportunity for comparing himself with other clavier players. The Abbé Johann Francis Xavier Sterkel, 1750 to 1817, one of the most celebrated performers of the day, came from Mayence, where he was pianist and chaplain to the Elector, during Mozart's stay at Mannheim. Last evening but one, he informs his father, December 26, 1777, I was all solito at Cannabic's, and Sterkel came in. He played 5 duets, but so quick as to be unintelligible, and neither distinctly nor in time. They all said so. Mademoiselle Cannabich played the 6th, and she really did it better than Sterkel. The same fault that he found with Sterkel, viz., the endeavor to make an effect by rapid execution and playing at sight, in reality a mere device to hide imperfect execution, Mozart also found with the playing of Vogler, 1749 to 1814, the solitary clavier performer resident at Mannheim. He tells his father, January 17, 1778, of his meeting Vogler at a large party. After dinner he had his 2 claviers brought, which were tuned together, and also his tiresome printed sonatas. I was obliged to play them, and he accompanied me on the other clavier. I was obliged, at his pressing request, to have my sonatas brought also. Before dinner he had stumbled through my concerto, the Lützow one, 246 K, prima vista. The first movement went prestissimo, the andante allegro, and the rondo really prestissimo. He played almost throughout a different bass to the one that was written, and sometimes the harmonies, and even the melodies, were altered. Indeed, this was inevitable, owing to the great speed. The eye could not see, and the hand could not grasp, the music. But what kind of playing at sight is that? The hearers, those I mean who are worthy of the name, can only say that they have seen music and clavier playing. They hear and think and feel just as little as the performer himself. You can imagine that the worst part of it to me is not being able to say, much too quick. After all, it is much easier to play fast than slow. Notes can be dropped out of passages without being noticed, but is that desirable? The rapidity allows the right and left hand to be used indiscriminately, but should it be so? In what does the art of playing at sight consist? In playing the piece correctly, in strict time, giving the proper expression to every passage and every note, so that it might be imagined that the player had composed the piece himself. Vogler's fingering is atrocious. His left thumb is like Adlgasser's, and he makes all the runs for the right hand with his first finger and thumb. Mozart's antipathy to Vogler shines through this description, and is equally apparent whenever he has occasion to mention him. Personally he had nothing to complain of in Vogler. Herr Vogler positively insisted on making my acquaintance, he writes to his father, January 17, 1778. After plaguing me very often to go to him, he puts his pride in his pocket and paid me the first visit. No assurance will be needed that the rivalry of the two in composition, organ, and clavier playing would not lead Mozart to disparage great merit where it existed. It might have contributed to sharpen his judgment, which, however, was essentially the same as that passed on Vogler by the whole orchestra, from the highest to the lowest. He was regarded as an interloper, who had usurped an important position in Mannheim, and had intrigued against such men as Holzbauer for the purpose. The violet stockings which he wore as papal legatee were thought absurd, and his habit of taking a prayer book into society, together with his music, and of frequently keeping visitors waiting while he performed his devotions, was considered mere affectation. Many complaints were made of his haughty and depreciatory manner, and his own performances fell far short of the expectations excited by himself. End of Section 40, Chapter 17, Part 2. Section 41 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1, by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by MaryAnn. The Life of Mozart by Otto JAHN, Section 41, Chapter 17, Part 3. But apart from all influence of partisanship or gossip, it is quite conceivable that two such diverse natures should exercise a mutual repulsion on each other. Vogler was no doubt an original and striking character. The very fact that his contemporaries were either his enthusiastic admirers or his sworn enemies affords proof of this. He possessed musical talent, intellect and shrewdness, together with much energy of character, so that his attainments were extensive both in the arts and sciences. But these qualities, uncombined with creative genius, could not reach the highest beauty and truth, either in art or science. We find Vogler, therefore, in whom creative genius did not exist, seeking for effect in the technicalities of his art, and as a consequence, in something outside the art itself. He prided himself especially on his programme music, which was full of purely sensuous effects, and on his playing, which was crowded with theoretical difficulties. The principal charm in both cases imported from without, not an essential product of the art itself. Vogler was the first to give this direction to musical activity, striving to hide a deficiency in creative power under general cultivation of mind, and, as a necessary result, hampering the natural development of true art. His celebrated pupils, Weber and Meyerbeer, have rendered the same tendency fruitful in consequence to modern music. A consistent endeavor after what is true and beautiful in art presupposes a singleness of mind in the artist which cannot exist with inordinate ambition and a calculating spirit. In truth, the contradictions in Vogler's moral nature, which were remarked even by his adherents, were as striking as those in his artistic nature. If we consider the impression such a man must have made on Mozart, whose creative genius was its own measure and law, penetrating the very essence of his being, and elevating even the drudgery of his profession to the freedom of high art, we can comprehend how he would instinctively recoil from Vogler, and how his own severe education, which had elevated and refined his nature without injuring his healthy love of truth, would prevent his doing full justice to his rival's merits. There can be no doubt that Mozart's opinion of Vogler, which he took no pains to conceal, gave great offense to the latter. But there is no evidence that he plotted against him, as the father conjectures, nor does Wolfgang himself make any such accusation. Among Vogler's adherents in Mannheim was Peter Winter, 1755 to 1826, who was almost the only friend, that is the only intimate friend, that Vogler had. His daily offerings to Vogler's vanity were much to be regretted. He objected, however, in after days, to be called Vogler's pupil. He seems to have taken a dislike to Mozart, which the latter had cause to feel very sensibly. The remaining members of the orchestra, however, were only the more attracted to Mozart by the position which he assumed in regard to Vogler. Wendling and Ramm meditated a journey to Paris during Lent, and Ritter, the bassoonist, was to precede them thither. They intended to give concerts together, and Wendling proposed to Wolfgang to accompany them, since such a composer and virtuoso as he would immeasurably strengthen their company. Wolfgang was strongly inclined to consent, and wrote to his father, December 3, 1777. If I stay here until Lent, I shall accompany Wendling, Ramm the oboist, and a very fine one, and Lauchery, the ballet manager, to Paris. Herr Wendling assures me that I shall have no cause to repent it. He has been twice in Paris, has only lately returned, and says it is the only place where fame and money can be made. You are a man, says he, who can do anything. I will show you how to set about it. You must compose operas, serious and comic, oratorios, and everything. Whoever has written a couple of operas in Paris is a made man at once. Then there are the concerts, spirituels, and Académie des Amateurs, where you get 5 louis d'ors for a symphony. If you give lessons, it is at the rate of 3 louis d'ors for 12. Sonatos, trios, and quartets are printed by subscription. Cannabich and Toschi send a great deal of their music to Paris. Wendling is a man who understands travelling. Pray write me your opinion on the subject. It seems to me a good idea. I shall travel with a man who knows the Paris of the present day thoroughly, for it has altered very much. I should spend little, indeed I think not half so much as now, for I should only have to pay for myself, mamma would remain here, and probably stay with the Wendlings. Herr Ritter, who plays the bassoon very well, sets out for Paris on the 12th instant. Ramm is a right honest, merry fellow of about 35. He has travelled much and knows the world well. The greatest and best musicians here like and esteem me. I am always called Herr Kapellmeister. Wolfgang's mother was not opposed to the project. She writes to her husband, December 11th, 1777. About Wolfgang and his journey to Paris, you must consider what is right. Nowadays Paris is the only place to get on. Herr Wendling is an honourable man, well known to all. He has travelled much, and has been in Paris 13 times, so that he knows it thoroughly. Our friend, Herr von Grimm, is his best friend also, and has done much for him. So you must decide as you like. I shall be ready to agree. Herr Wendling has assured me that he would act as Wolfgang's father. He loves him as his own son, and will, I am sure, take as good care of him as I do. You can well imagine that I am averse to parting from him, and if I have to come home alone, the long journey will be a great trial to me, but what can be done? The journey to Paris would be more fatiguing and too expensive, for one does not spend a fourth part travelling alone. If this plan was to be carried out, Wolfgang must remain at Mannheim through the winter. His first endeavour, therefore, was to obtain a situation in the band from the Elector, and his friends eagerly seconded his efforts. Holzbauer had taken him soon after his arrival to the manager, Count Savioli, November 4th, 1777, where Cannabich chanced to be present. Herr Holzbauer said to the Count in Italian that I wished for the honour of playing before His Highness the Elector. I had been here 15 years before, when I was 8 years old. I was now older and taller, and my music had improved also. Ah, said the Count, that is young somebody or other, for whom he mistook me. Then Cannabich began to speak. I pretended not to listen, and talked to someone else, but I noticed that he spoke very earnestly. Then the Count said to me, I hear that you play fairly well on the clavier. I made obeisance. The Elector happened to be holding court at the time, and Count Savioli at once presented Wolfgang to the Electress, who received him very graciously, and remembered his being there 15 years before, though she would not have recognized him. On November 6th there was a grand state concert, at which Mozart played a concerto, and before the closing symphony a sonata, and something out of his head. The Elector and his wife and all the court were pleased with me. At the concert, every time I played, she and the Elector came quite near my clavier. After the concert, Cannabich intimated that I might speak to the Elector. I kissed hands, and he said, I think it is 15 years since you were here before? Yes, your Highness, 15 years since I had the honour. You play remarkably well. When I kissed the hand of the Princess, she said, Monsieur, je vous assure, on ne peut pas jouer mieux. The Electress informed him that she should like him to play to her alone, and they were obliged to remain until the command to do so should arrive. Some days after, Count Savioli handed him a present, a beautiful gold watch. 10 gold caroli would, however, have been more useful to him than the watch, which was valued at 20. I have now with your permission 5 watches. I have a great mind to have a pocket made on each side, and to wear 2 watches, which is the fashion now, so that it may not occur to anyone to give me another. In his father's opinion, Wolfgang would do wrong to remain in Mannheim any longer than necessary, unless he had certain prospects of a situation there. His good friends could watch over any future interests in his absence, and he ought not to lose the opportunity of making himself known in different places, and of earning money. According to intelligence received from Frankfurt, there was nothing to be made there, but at Mayence, with the support of the Concertmeister, George Kreuser, concerts might be arranged both in private, before the enthusiastically musical Elector, and in the town. Something, too, might be made at Koblenz, out of the Elector Clemens, between whom and the Elector Wolfgang had sat at table and composed with a pencil in Munich, when they were returning from England, page 48. Nothing could be done in Bonn. They might return to Mannheim after such expeditions as these, if there was any prospect of remaining there over the winter. Paris must only be thought of as a last resource. It would be a difficult and risky undertaking. To L. Mozart, who was continually revolving schemes in his mind, it seemed in no way right that the travellers should have settled themselves so comfortably at Mannheim. Wolfgang, finding himself for the first time in a congenial professional atmosphere, and in familiar intercourse with cultivated minds, was only too ready to hearken when every one said to him, "Where can you go for the winter? The season is too bad for travelling. Stay here." And then the prospects which so many good friends opened to him appeared to him in no wise uncertain. His mother allowed herself to be led by her son and his friends, and was easily persuaded that to stay in Mannheim would be most advantageous for Wolfgang. The Elector had ordered Mozart to be conducted before his natural children, whom he visited for some hours every afternoon, taking great interest in their studies. Mozart, who was accompanied by Cannabich, thus describes the interview (November 8, 1777). "I talked to the Elector quite familiarly. He is both gracious and good. He said to me, 'I hear that you wrote an opera at Munich.' 'Yes, your Highness. I humbly crave your grace. It is my greatest wish to write an opera here. I pray your Highness not to forget me. I can write German, too, God be praised.' Well, that may happen. He has one son and 3 daughters. The eldest and the young Count play the clavier. The Elector consulted me quite confidentially about his children. I spoke quite openly, but without blaming their master. Cannabich was of my opinion, too. When the Elector left he thanked me very politely. Some days after he went again, and played with his whole heart 3 times at the request of the Elector, who sat by him motionless. A certain professor gave him a subject for a fugue. This seemed the surest way to the favour of the Elector. At Cannabich's instigation he tells his father, who counted on Cannabich's friendship, his interest being concerned on his daughter's account. He asked Count Savioli whether the Elector would not keep him there during the winter, and he would engage to give the children lessons. Cannabich promised to propose and support this plan to the Elector, but he must wait until after the gala days, and then the best results might be expected. But a thing like this must not be hurried, and patience would be required, as Wolfgang informs his father, and admonishes him not to lose time in speculations, which generally prove useless. In the meantime he had drawn on the banker for 150 gulden, for the host would rather hear the jingle of money than of music. This did not in any way please Wolfgang's father, who delivers a sharp reproof for his thoughtless expression as to the father's speculation being useless. "Gerechter Gott," he writes, "you tell me not to speculate when I am in debt already on your account 450 florins, and you think you will put me in good humour by writing all sorts of absurd nonsense." He shows them how little use they have made of their time so far, and scolds them for not announcing their plans beforehand, so that proper preparations could be made. I beg you, my dear Wolfgang, to be more thoughtful, and not to wait to write about things until they are past, otherwise all will go wrong. He points out how they have been living hitherto almost entirely on hope, leaving him to the care of the money which they required. He had not even received the accounts which his dear wife had promised him, and they had drawn money without giving him proper notice. A journey like this is no joke. You have not felt it hitherto. You must have something more serious in your head than nonsense. You have to foresee, to consider, to calculate, or else you will find yourself in a mess. Without money, and no money means no friends, even if you give lessons 100 times over, and complete sonatas, and play the fool every night from 10 to 12 o'clock. Ask those dear friends of yours for credit. All the jokes will come to an end, and the most jocular countenance will turn grave on a sudden. Hereupon followed a very vague money account from the wife, December 11, 1777. My dear husband, you wish to know what we have spent on our journey. We sent you Albert's bill, and the Augsburg one was 38 florins. Wolfgang has told you that we were 24 florins short, but he has not included the expenses of the concert, which were 16 florins, nor the hotel bill, so that when we came to Mannheim we had not more than 60 gulden, and if we had left there in a fortnight, there would not have been much over, for travelling costs more, since things have grown so dear. It is not what it was. You would be surprised. The irritated and somewhat despondent tone in which Wolfgang replied to his father's reproaches, November 20th, 1777, shows that he felt their truth, and that the easy-going comfort of his life at Mannheim was disturbed by the first indications of his duty. If you consider the cause of my inaction to be laziness and want of care, then I can do nothing but thank you for your good opinion, and lament from my heart that my father does not know me better. I am not careless, I am only resigned to everything, and so can wait with patience and bear all, provided my honour and my good name of Mozart do not suffer. Well, if it must be, it must. But I pray you beforehand not to rejoice or to be sorry before its time, for whatever happens, it is all right if one is healthy. Happiness consists in the imagination. November 29, 1777. But his father was not satisfied with all this moral philosophy, and calmly criticizes the saying that happiness consists in imagination as being worthy only of a wild herb. He calls upon his son to realize the situation of being asked to pay and having no money. My dear Wolfgang, that is a saying fit for those who are satisfied with nothing. The negotiations with the Elector continued, and Wolfgang sought to enlighten his father concerning Cannabic's intentions and behavior. November 29, 1777. In the afternoon, after the first interview with Savioli, I was at Cannabic's, and, as it was by his advice that I had gone to the Count, he asked me whether I had been. I told him all. He said, I should be very glad if you remained with us all winter, but it would be still better if you could take service here altogether. I said, I could wish for nothing better than to be always with you, but I do not see how that is possible. You have 2 Kapellmeisters already, and I could not consent to come after Vogler. Nor need you, said he. No musician here is under the Kapellmeister, nor even under the manager. The Elector could appoint you his chamber composer. Just wait a little. I will speak to the Count about it. The following Thursday was the state concert. When the Count saw me, he apologized for not having spoken, but he said he was waiting for Monday, when the court would be over. I let 3 days pass, and then, as I heard nothing, I went to inquire. He said, My dear Monsieur Mozart, this was Friday, that is, yesterday. Today the Elector went hunting, and I could not possibly ask him, but tomorrow at this time you shall certainly have an answer. End of section 41. Chapter 17, Part 3. Section 42 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1, by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by MaryAnn Spiegel. The Life of Mozart, by Otto JAHN. Section 42, Chapter 17, Part 4. I begged him not to forget. Truth to tell, I was a little annoyed when I came away, and I determined to take my easiest 6 variations on the Fischer Minuet, 179K. I had already copied them out for the purpose, to the young Count, that I might have an opportunity of speaking to the Elector myself. When I brought them, the governess could not contain her delight. I was politely received. Then I produced the variations, and said they were for the young Count. She said, Oh, you are very good, but have you nothing for the Countess? Not at present, said I, but, if I remain here long enough, I shall. Apropos, she said, I'm glad that you are to remain the winter here. Indeed. I did not know. That is curious. I am surprised. The Elector told me himself. Well, if he has said it, I suppose it is so, for of course my staying here depends on the Elector. Then I told her the whole story. We agreed that I should come tomorrow at 4 o'clock and bring something for the Countess. She would speak to the Elector before I came, and I should meet him there. I have been today, but he has not been there. I will go again tomorrow. I have a rondo for the Countess. Now, have I not enough reason to remain here and await the issue? Ought I to leave now that so important a step is taken? I have an opportunity of speaking to the Elector myself. I think I shall probably remain the winter here, for the Elector likes me, thinks much of me, and knows what I can do. I hope to be able to give you good news in my next letter. I beg you again not to sorrow or rejoice about it too soon, and to tell the affair to no one but Herr Bullinger and my sister. But the affair was not so easily settled. In his next letter, December 3, 1777, Wolfgang could only tell his father of the many incidents which seemed to promise a good result. Last Monday, after 3 successive attempts morning and afternoon, I was fortunate enough to meet with the Elector. We all thought that our trouble was again in vain, for it was getting late, but at last we saw him coming. The governess at once placed the Countess at the clavier, and I sat near her, giving her a lesson. The Elector saw us so when he arrived. We stood up, but he told us to continue. When she had finished playing, the governess remarked that I had written a charming rondo for her. I played it, and he was highly pleased. Then he asked, "But will she be able to learn it?" "Oh yes," said I. "I only wish that I could have the happiness of teaching it to her myself." He took snuff and said, "I should like it, but would it not do her harm to have two masters?" "Oh, no, your Highness. It only signifies whether she has a good or a bad one. I hope your Highness will have no doubt, will have confidence in me." "Oh, certainly," said he. Then the governess said, "Monsieur Mozart has also written variations on Fischer's minuet for the young Count. I played them, and he was again very pleased. Then he began to play with the children, and I thanked him for the presentation watch. He said, 'Well, I will think about it. How long shall you remain here?' 'As long as your Highness commands. I have no engagements elsewhere.' And that was all. This morning I was there again, and was told that the Elector had said several times last night that Mozart would remain all winter. Now that it has gone so far I must wait. To-day I dined at Wendling's for the 4th time. Before dinner Count Savioli came in with the Kapellmeister Schweitzer, who arrived yesterday. Savioli said to me, 'I have spoken several times to the Elector, but he has not yet made up his mind.' I told him I should like to say a word to him, and we went to the window. I told him the doubts of the Elector, complained of being kept waiting so long, and begged him to induce the Elector to engage me. Only I feared, I said, that he would offer me so little that I should not be able to remain. Let him give me work. I wanted work. He promised to do as I asked. It may be this evening, since he does not go to court today. But tomorrow he has promised me a decided answer. Now, let what may happen, I shall be content. If he does not keep me, I shall ask for a parting gift, for I do not intend to make the Elector a present of the rondo and the variations. I assure you I take the affair quite composedly, knowing that all will be for the best, as, come what may, I have resigned myself to the will of God." But for several days yet no answer could be obtained from the Elector except a shrug of the shoulders and "I have not made up my mind." At last Mozart was able to acquaint his father with the result of all these negotiations. It was such as L. Mozart had expected from the first, December 10, 1777. "There is nothing to be done with the Elector at present. The day before yesterday I went to the concert at court to get my answer. Count Savioli avoided me as long as he could, but I went up to him and when he saw me he shrugged his shoulders. 'What?' said I. 'No answer yet?' 'A thousand pardons,' said he, 'but, unfortunately, nothing can be done.' 'Eh bien,' I answered, 'the Elector might have told me that sooner.' 'Yes,' said he, 'he would not have made up his mind now if I had not urged him to it, and represented to him how long you have been waiting already, and spending your money at the hotel.' 'That annoys me most of all,' I answered. 'It is not at all well done. But I am exceedingly obliged to you, Count,' he is not called Excellency, 'for your endeavors on my behalf, and I shall be obliged if you will thank the Elector in my name for his gracious, though somewhat tardy, intelligence, and assure him that, if it had pleased him to engage me, he would not have repented doing so.' 'Oh,' said he, 'I am more sure of that than you believe.'" The unexpected turn of affairs made quite as unpleasant an impression upon the Mannheim circle of friends as upon Mozart. He went at once to Cannabich, and he being out hunting, related the whole story to his wife. When Mademoiselle Rose, who was 3 rooms off and busied with the linen, had finished, she came in and said to me, "Is it your pleasure that we begin?" For it was time for a lesson. "I am at your service," said I. "We will have a good steady lesson to-day," said she. "We will indeed," I answered, "for it will not last much longer." "How so? Why?" She went to her mamma, who told her. "What?" she said. "Is it really true? I do not believe it." "Yes, yes, quite true," said I. She played my sonata through quite seriously. Believe me, I could not refrain from weeping, and before it was ended there were tears in the eyes of the mother and daughter, and of Herr Schatzmeister, who was present, for the sonata was a favorite with the whole house. "You see," said Schatzmeister, "when Herr Kapellmeister, they always call me so, goes away, he makes us all cry. I must say that I have made good friends here." and one learns to know them under such circumstances. Wendling was specially concerned at the intelligence. When Mozart communicated it he grew quite red, and said very hastily, "We must find some way of keeping you here, at all events for the 2 months before we go to Paris together." When Wolfgang went to dine with him next day he made him what seemed a very satisfactory proposal. A Dutchman, de Jahn or de Camp, nicknamed the Nabob, who lived on his means and had been a friend and admirer of Wolfgang, offered to give him 200 florins for 3 short and easy concertos and 2 quartets for the flute. Then Cannabich would guarantee at least 2 well-paying pupils, and Mozart was to have duets for clavier and violin printed by subscription. Wendling offered him board, and he could have free quarters at the house of the Chamberlain Serrarius. Mozart was rejoiced at the prospect of being able to remain in Mannheim, and thought he should have enough to do for all winter in composing 3 concertos, 2 quartets, 4 or 6 clavier duets, besides a grand mass, which he intended to present to the Elector. The following day he set himself to find small, cheap lodgings for his mother, which was not an easy matter. It was a satisfaction to Wolfgang's father, who was not surprised that Wendling should seek to retain so excellent a fourth party for the expedition to Paris, to have the state of affairs laid clearly before him. He stipulated only that the journey should not take place during the cold of winter, and thought the plan feasible, provided the Dutchman could be relied on. If not, they must at once proceed to Mayence. But on no account were the mother and son to separate. "As long as your mother remains, you must remain with her," he writes, December 18, 1777. "You must not think of leaving your mother to the care of others so long as you and she can be together." The small difference in rent was not worth considering, and it was impossible for her to go home at present. "Be most careful to remain with your mother and care for her even as she is cared for you." It was not only physical care that he had in his mind, but watchfulness over his son's moral and religious behavior. He expresses some anxiety on these points, December 15. "Let me ask you whether Wolfgang has not forgotten to go to confession lately? God before everything! From him alone can we expect earthly happiness and eternal safety." Young people are apt to be impatient when told this. I know it, for I have been young myself, but, God be praised, I never failed to come to myself in time after any youthful folly, to flee from all danger to my soul, and to keep God and my honor and the dangerous consequences of sin always before my eyes. His wife reassured him by saying that Wolfgang had confessed at the feast of the Immaculate Conception, and that they had heard Mass regularly on Sundays, though not always on week days. Wolfgang justified himself, not without a touch of irritability, December 20, 1777. "I have written that your last letter gave me great pleasure, and that is true, but one part of it vexed me a little, the question whether I had not somewhat neglected confession. I have nothing to reply to this, except to make you one request, which is, not to think so ill of me again. I am fond of fun, but be assured that I can be serious on occasion. Since I left Salzburg, and even before, I have met with people whose speech and actions I should have been ashamed to imitate, although they were 10, 20, or 30 years older than myself. So I beg you earnestly to have a better opinion of me." Under these circumstances, the offer of Serrarius to afford lodging, firing, and light to both mother and son came opportunely. Wolfgang was to give lessons to his daughter in return. The mother was especially pleased at the change, having been somewhat lonely at the hotel during Wolfgang's long absences. They had good beds, careful attendance, and she supped and spent the evenings with her hostess, chatting with her often until 11 o'clock. Wolfgang does not seem to have been particularly struck with the talent of the daughter of the house, Teresa Perignon, who had played the clavier since she was 8 years old. He seldom mentions the house nymph. Nevertheless, she practiced one of his concertos and performed it at a large musical party at home, and afterwards she played the third and easiest of his concertos for 3 claviers at a concert. Before his departure from Mannheim he composed, March 11, 1778, a clavier sonata with violin accompaniment for her, 296 K. He gave lessons in composition to young Danner, in return for which his mother dined there every day. He himself boarded at Wendling's. "Wolfgang," writes his mother, "has so much to do with composing and giving lessons that he has no time to pay visits to anybody. So you see that we can comfortably stay here during the winter. And it is all Herr Wendling's doing. He loves Wolfgang as his own son." Wolfgang himself gives his father the following account of his daily life, December 20th, 1777. We cannot rise before 8 o'clock, for our room, being on the ground floor, is not light until 8:30. Then I dress quickly. At 10 o'clock I set to work composing until 12 or half past, when I go to Wendling's and write a little more until 1:30, when we dine. At 3 I go to give lessons in gallantry and thorough bass to a Dutch officer, de la Poterie, for which, if I do not mistake, I shall have 4 ducats for 12 lessons. At 4 I return home to give a lesson to the daughter of the house, but we never begin before 4:30, because we are waiting for lights. At 6 I go to Cannabic's and teach Mademoiselle Rose. I stay there to supper, and then we talk or play a little, or sometimes I take a book out of my pocket and read, as I used to do at Salzburg. His mother had reason to say that Wolfgang was so busy he did not know which way to turn, and she might well add that her husband could not conceive how highly Wolfgang was esteemed for his music and other things, so that every one said that he had not his equal, and his compositions were literally idolized. At the same time the father was informed that Wolfgang's beard has to be removed, and on his question as to whether it has been cut, burnt, or shaved off, the answer is duly given. The beard has not been shaved yet, only cut with scissors, but it cannot be done so any more, and next time the barber must be called in. The great musical event which was engrossing public attention at this time was the approaching production of Wieland and Schweitzer's Rosamunde. As the result of flattering overtures made to him during the summer of 1776, Wieland set to work on his text in the spring of 1777. The subject, a curious one to choose for Mannheim, where the Elector had many Rosamunds, and the Electress took little pains to conceal her chagrin thereat, facts of which Wieland had no suspicion, inspired him with the greatest enthusiasm. This caused him to be all the more unpleasantly surprised when Jacobi and Goethe declared the opera a failure, and the minister Hompesch pressed for a revision of the last act. He wished to withdraw it altogether, although Schweitzer had already composed 3 acts of great beauty. But Hompesch would on no account consent to this, and he was obliged to undertake the revision. Wieland was far from being satisfied with his own share of the opera, but he declared that Schweitzer had produced a work which would attract people for miles round to hear it. Wieland was invited to assist in person at the production of the opera. Dissatisfaction with the work, and domestic and economical considerations, caused him some hesitation, but the wish once more to enjoy music to the full finally prevailed, and he looked forward with pleasure to a meeting with old friends. Jacobi, Sophie Laroche and her daughter, and Max Brentano promised to come to Mannheim for the occasion. The production of the opera had been first fixed for the fête day of the Elector, November 4th, 1777, but owing to the delay caused by the revision it did not appear until January 1778. When all the preparations, the splendid scenery and costumes were completed, Schweitzer came to Mannheim to conduct the final rehearsals himself. Mozart, who made his acquaintance at once, found him a good honest man, but dry and positive like Michael Haydn, only that his language is more refined. December 3rd, 1777. There are beautiful things in the new opera, and I doubt not that it will succeed. Alceste was a success, and is not half so fine as Rosamunde. Certainly its being the first German opera had much to do with the success, and now that the novelty has worn off it has ceased to make the same impression. The opera was rehearsed daily, and it affords proof of the esteem in which Wolfgang was held by the band that, when Schweitzer was unwell, he had to take his place and conduct the opera with several of the violins at Wendling's. December 18, 1777. Repeated hearing of the opera did not increase Mozart's admiration for it. Wolfgang does not care for the new opera, writes his mother, December 18, 1777. He says there is no nature in it and much exaggeration, and that it is not well written for the singers. We must wait to see what effect it will produce. He writes himself, December 10, 1777, Rosamunde was rehearsed at the theatre today. It is good, but nothing more, and if it were bad, could it not be performed just the same? End of section 42, chapter 17, part 4. Section 43 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1, by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by MaryAnn. The Life of Mozart by Otto JAHN, Section 43, Chapter 17, Part 5. Later on, September 11, 1778, he pities Aloysia Weber on account of her poor part in Rosamunde. She has only one song, which might be made something of, but the voice part is à la Schweitzer, like the barking of dogs. She has a kind of rondo in the second act, which allows her to sustain her voice and display it a little. Woe to the vocalist, male or female, who falls into Schweitzer's hands. He will never acquire the art of writing for the voice. The arrival of Wieland, who was esteemed before all German poets at Mannheim, was eagerly looked for by the public, and Wolfgang looked forward to making his acquaintance. Wieland arrived on December 21st, and was equally delighted with his reception by the Elector and with the homage of the populace. Every one is anxious to have me, and each day is distinguished by something which makes the remembrance of it pleasant, he writes on December 26th to Sophia La Roche, and to Merck on the following day. I can say nothing more than that I am well both in soul and body, for the reason that I have to play no part but the one natural to me, and that my affairs, so far as it appears, are prospering. God grant that I may not grow too happy among these people, but that is provided against. Mozart was not carried away by the universal enthusiasm for the celebrated poet, and sends his father the following impartial description, December 27, 1777. I have made the acquaintance of Herr Wieland, but he does not know me as well as I know him, for he has not heard me play yet. He is not at all what I had expected to find him. His speech seems to me somewhat affected. He has a childish voice, a fixed stare, a certain scholar-like bluntness, and yet sometimes a stupid condescension. I am not surprised at anything in his behavior here, whatever it may be in Weimar or elsewhere, for the people look at him as if he had come down from heaven. Everyone yields to him, and there is silence directly he opens his mouth. It is only a pity that he keeps people in suspense so long, for he has a defect in his utterance, and has to speak very slowly, and stop every 6 words. He is extremely ugly, covered with pockmarks, and with a very long nose. His height is somewhat greater than your own. After Wieland had learnt to know Mozart also, he writes, January 10, 1778, Herr Wieland, after hearing me twice, is quite enchanted. The last time he paid me all manner of compliments, ending up with, "It has been a real happiness to me to meet you here," and a squeeze of the hand. Wieland was delighted with Wendling, and all the preparations for the opera were found satisfactory. The first performance was fixed for January 11, and he hoped to obtain much honor for his Rosamunde in Mannheim, if only the illness of the Elector of Bavaria did not frustrate all his hopes. But this fear was unhappily realized. The Elector Maximilian died on December 30th. The intelligence reached Mannheim as Karl Theodor was attending a religious service for the New Year, and the following evening he set out for Munich. All the festivities came to an end. The death of Maximilian Joseph, writes Wieland to Baron von Gebler, December 5, 1778, has disappointed both myself and the public. My opera, Rosamunde, set to admirable music by Herr Schweitzer, was to have been given for the first time on the 11th, and repeated 8 times during the carnival. I had every prospect of as great a success as perhaps an opera ever had, when the death of the Elector of Bavaria brought about an alteration on the stage of public events, the lugubrious decorations of which have quite suppressed mine. The opera was rehearsed once more in his honor, and then he travelled back to Weimar, content with the result of his visit, though his main object was defeated. The change of government had more lasting effects for Mannheim, and especially for the musicians there, than a mere temporary suspension of gaiety. The patriotic inhabitants of the Palatinate could not indeed believe that their Elector would transfer his capital to Munich, but the prospects of the future were uncertain and alarming, owing to the threatening turn taken by political events. If Mozart had felt himself moved to write German operas in Munich, the impulse must have been vastly strengthened by his stay in Mannheim. He had offered his services to the Elector with this object. When the offer was declined, a new prospect was opened to him in Vienna, with which he acquaints his father, January 11, 1778. I know for certain that the Emperor is thinking of establishing opera in Vienna, and that he is seeking everywhere for a young Kapellmeister, a German and a genius, who is capable of producing something new. Benda is seeking in Gotha, but Schweitzer has more influence. This would be just the thing for me, well paid, of course. If the Emperor gives me 1,000 florins, I will write him an opera, and if he does not pay me, it is all the same. Pray write to all imaginable friends in Vienna that I am in a position to serve the Emperor. If needs be, he may try me with an opera, and what he does after, I really do not care. Adieu. I hope you will put the affair in motion at once, or someone may be beforehand with me. L. Mozart was not the man to let this opportunity slip. He applied at once to Heufeld, who had formerly been well disposed towards them, and whose knowledge and influence could be relied upon, begging him to exert himself on Wolfgang's behalf. Letters from Mesmer, pages 86 and 145, had just arrived from Vienna, asking why Wolfgang did not come to Vienna, where there was always room for true talent. He should have board and lodging with him as long as he liked, and his friends would see to his interests. But the prospects, so far as the opera was concerned, were not very promising. L. Mozart was of the opinion, January 29, 1778, that the Emperor was like the Archbishop. He wanted a good thing at a very cheap rate. A letter from Heufeld was definitive, January 23, 1778. It is true that His Majesty the Emperor, to whom his mother has quite resigned the care of the theatre, wishes to establish German opera. All orders come through the High Chamberlain, Count von Rosenberg, to the company among whom there is a sort of council for the regulation of the pieces and parts. At the opera, which is now combined with the National Company, the additional singers are Mademoiselle Cavalieri and Schindler's daughter, married to Langen, with a bass whose name I forget, Fuchs. Today was the first rehearsal of the first opera, Die Bergknappen, of which Herr Weidmann has finished the words, and Herr Umlauf, who plays the viola in the orchestra, the music. The performance will take place shortly. All this is only an experiment to see if anything can be done with the Germans in this line. It is certain that no composer will be engaged at present, particularly as Gluck and Salieri are in the Emperor's service. To recommend anyone at present would be the surest way to failure, and no advocate can be employed to reach the Emperor's ear, since he arranges everything himself according to his own ideas and inclinations. Everyone knows this, and no one ventures on a proposal or recommendation. His Majesty has sought out Gluck and Salieri, and most of those who are now in his service, in the same way. I could give you several examples of people who have applied indirectly to His Majesty and have failed in their suit. The way in which you propose approaching him seems to me far from good, and the reason I decline presenting a petition is my certain conviction that it would be useless, and indeed prejudicial to your interests. There is another more creditable and more certain way open to first-rate talent, and that is the production of some work, for which there is every opportunity. Let your son take the trouble of setting any good German opera to music, and submitting it to the supreme pleasure of the Emperor, and then let him wait the event, and follow in person if his work is well received. In this case, indeed, his presence will be necessary. Your son may be without any apprehension with regard to Benda and Schweitzer. I can answer for there being no trouble from that quarter. Their fame is not so great here as elsewhere. Perhaps even Wieland's great opinion of these gentlemen has somewhat abated since his stay at Mannheim. I have a letter of the 5th instant from him, in which he acknowledges to having received altogether new ideas upon music in Mannheim. When this letter reached Mozart, he was in a very excited state, the reason for which will be presently noted, and the effect it produced was greater than mere disappointment. His self-love, which had been raised to so high a pitch by the appreciation of his Mannheim admirers, was wounded by the proposal that he should write a comic opera on approval, like a beginner. Even the condescending good nature of Heufeld to his dear Wolfgang increased his annoyance. His father was full of plans and cares for his son's advancement. An opportunity which offered for a settlement in Salzburg was little likely to please Wolfgang. The city had been thrown into consternation on December 21, 1777, by the paralytic seizure of Ad Glaser while he was playing the organ. His death followed the same evening. It soon became clear that Wolfgang's return and application for the vacant post would not be unacceptable to the authorities, and his father informs him of several hints he had received to that effect. January 12, 1778. His Excellency the Lord High Steward apprised me that His Serene Highness had commanded him to inquire from Haydn and myself if we knew of a really good organist. He must also be an excellent clavier player, of good appearance and manners, and able to give lessons to the ladies of the court. What, said I, did His Serene Highness mention me? Yes, you in particular, he said, and laughed. I said, I know nobody with all these qualities. If there is such a one in Mannheim, he may make his fortune. But even if his father had been willing to take these hints, Wolfgang would have had no ear for them. With the idea that a longer stay in Mannheim might yet result in a permanent engagement, L. Mozart wrote to the Padre Martini in December 1777, sending him Wolfgang's promised portrait, and begging him to use all his influence with the Elector. With his usual good nature, the Padre promised to write to Raff, authorizing him to say to the Elector in his name everything imaginable in Wolfgang's favor, and to praise him according to his deserts. Even if the political situation should operate unfavorably at the moment, the appeal would certainly bear fruit at a future time. No such letter, however, reached Raff from the Padre Martini, but Wolfgang made it the occasion of forming a closer acquaintance with Raff and advancing his own claims. He writes, February 28, 1778. Yesterday I took Raff a song which I had just written for him. The words are, Si al labbro mio non credi, bella nemica mia, etc. I do not think they are metastasios. The song pleases him greatly. One has to go carefully to work with a man like this. I selected the words with care, because I knew that he had sung them before, and that they would come easier and more pleasantly to him. I asked him to tell me candidly if he did not care for them or like them, and I would alter the song to his pleasure, or write it over again. Heaven forbid, he said, let the song remain as it is, for it is very fine, only I must beg you to shorten it a little, for I've lost the power now of sustaining my voice so long. Willingly, said I, as much as you please. I took care to make it long, for it is much easier to curtail than to lengthen a song. After he had sung the second part, he took off his spectacles, looked hard at me, and said, Beautiful, beautiful, that is a charming second part, and he sang it 3 times. When I went away he thanked me cordially, and I assured him in return that I would arrange the song to his satisfaction. I like a song to be fitted to the singer, like a well-made garment. The aria, 295 without the introductory recitative, has the following words. Si al labbro mio non credi, bella nemica mia, aprimi il petto I veti, quae silamante cor, I cor dolente afflitto, ma d'ogni colpa privo, si pur non è delitto, un innocente ador. The treatment is more strictly orthodox than had latterly been usual with Mozart, apparently out of consideration to the singer. The first part is an elaborate adagio, full of simple melody and fervent expression. The tone of deep sorrow given to the words aprimi il petto is very impressive, melodious and pleasing, with few passages, and those not florid. The second part, allegretto, 3/8 in G minor, is especially rhythmical and original in its harmonies, animated and full of expression. Although the arrangement of this part is not quite in the old style, it has decided individuality, and contrasts so effectively with the adagio that one can easily understand the delight with which it inspired the old singer. The song does not exceed the compass of, and keeps to the position of the tenor voice proper, full opportunity for display being afforded to the singer. The free and finely colored accompaniment never obscures the voice, and the whole song is not inferior to later and better known works. The time had now arrived for the expedition to Paris, and Mozart's anxious father was unsparing in thought and wise counsel. He advised them to prepare in good time for the mother's journey from Mannheim to Augsburg at the beginning of March, and he impressed upon Wolfgang that his stay in Paris was not to be limited by weeks or months, but was to last until he had gained both fame and money. He must therefore wind up all his affairs in Mannheim before he left. His father also gave him circumstantial rules for his guidance in society. He was to avoid intimacies, especially with other composers, such as Gluck, Piccini, and Grétry, whose rivalry might be feared. De la politesse et pas d'autre chose. He was above all to observe the greatest prudence in his dealings with the female sex, who were always on the watch for young men of great talent whom they might dupe and entangle, or even marry. That would be my death, says his father, and he sends him a long list of their patrons during their former stay, whom he was to seek out immediately on his arrival. He is especially assured of the tried friendship of Grimm, and of his own studies and duties. Think daily what you owe to God, who has given you such extraordinary talents. To L. Mozart's astonishment, he received a letter from Wolfgang, February 4, 1778, informing him of his intention of giving up the journey to Paris, and of the reasons which had led to this determination. Mamma and I have talked it over, and agreed that the life which Wendling leads does not suit me. Wendling is a thoroughly honest, good man, but he and all his household are totally without religion. His daughter's relations to the Elector sufficiently prove this. Ramm is good at heart, but a libertine. I know myself, and know that I have so much religion that I should never commit an action that I could not proclaim to the whole world, but the mere thought of travelling with people whose way of thinking is so opposed to mine, and to that of all honourable men, frightens me. They may do as they please, but I have no wish to accompany them. I should not have a happy hour. I should never know what I was saying, for, in one word, I have no confidence in them. Friendship without a religious basis is not lasting. I have already given them a little pregusto. I have told them that letters have reached me, of which I can say nothing further than that they interfere with my journey to Paris with them. I may be able to follow, but perhaps I shall have to go elsewhere, and they must not depend on me. The mother corroborates all this, and declares she had never approved of the society of Wendling and Ramm, but that she had said nothing, for she was never listened to. In her next letter she asserts that it would certainly be dangerous companionship for Wolfgang, and tells her husband, it is true that Herr Wendling is the best-natured man in the world, but neither he nor his family have any idea of religion, nor care for it. Neither the mother nor the daughter enter a church all the year round, nor do they ever confess nor hear Mass, but they are always going to the play. They say church is not healthy. L. Mozart was not a little surprised that his wife and son should so suddenly discover this lack of faith at the end of a long acquaintance. You are quite right not to travel in undesirable company, he answers, February 16, 1778. But you must have been aware of the bad qualities of these men for a long time, and you have had so little confidence in your anxious father that you have never written to ask his advice on the subject, and, shocking, neither has your mother done so. There was not much to be said in answer to this, except that they had allowed themselves to be deceived by the universal praise of Wendling and by his really good qualities, and had overlooked his want of religion. End of section 43, chapter 17, part 5.
Section 44 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1 by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Dorr. The Life of Mozart by Otto JAHN. Section 44, Chapter 17, Part 6. Wolfgang gave his father other reasons against the expedition. February 7, 1778. I have already given you my chief reason for not going with these people to Paris. The second is that I cannot quite see what I should have to do in Paris. My only means of advancement would be lesson-giving, and that work is distasteful to me. I have had a striking example of that here. I might have had 2 pupils. I went to each of them 3 times. Then I found one of them out. Consequently, I did not go again. I will gladly give lessons as a favor, particularly to anyone who shows genius and a real wish to learn. But to be obliged to go to a house at a certain hour, or to be obliged to wait at home for a pupil is what I cannot do, even if it were to bring me some profit. I leave that to those who can do nothing but play the clavier. I am a composer, a born Kapellmeister. I ought not to bury my talent for composition, which a merciful God has so richly bestowed upon me. I may say it without pride, for I feel it now more than ever. And pupils are most distracting to the mind. I would rather, so to speak, neglect the clavier than composition, for the clavier is only a subordinate affair. Only, God be praised, a very powerful subordinate. He had said the same to Wendling, and told him that if he would only put something certain in his way, he would gladly follow to Paris, especially if it was an opera. Opera writing is my chief idea and object. French rather than German, but Italian rather than either French or German. Wendling and his friends are all of opinion that my compositions would be wonderfully successful in Paris, for as you know, I can adapt myself to every sort and style of composition. All things considered, we cannot but feel that Wolfgang's father was justified in writing as follows. February 23rd, 1778. So you intend only to give lessons as a favor, do you? And you mean to leave your old father in his present straits? For a young fellow like you, lesson-giving is far too much trouble, even when it is well paid. It is more fitted to your old father to run from house to house for a wretched pittance in order to support himself and his daughter, and to send the little that remains to you, instead of paying his debts, and all that you may amuse yourself by giving lessons to some silly girl for nothing. My son, reflect and give ear to your own good sense. Reflect whether you do not deal more hardly with me than our prince himself. God has given you an excellent judgment, and two things only hinder you from employing it on your own affairs. First, a trifle too much of conceit and self-love, and secondly, an inclination to be over-confiding and to open your heart to everyone you meet. He made him easy as to lesson-giving in Paris, February 16th, 1778. In the first place, no one will discharge his master at once in order to take you, and in the second place, no one would venture to engage you, nor should you take anyone except a lady now and then, who plays well already and has a fancy for learning from you, for which she is willing to pay well. Such lady pupils as these will take endless trouble to collect subscriptions for your compositions. The ladies in Paris are omnipotent. They are great amateurs of the clavier, and many of them play extremely well. They would be your best allies for getting commissions, and you will be able, by their help, to make both fame and money with clavier pieces, violin quartets, symphonies, and such collections of French songs with the clavier as you lately sent me. Then, at last, you will arrive at an opera. Why do you hesitate? But you always want things done in a moment, before you have been either seen or heard. Look down the long list of our former acquaintances in Paris. They are all, at least the greater number, the best people in the town. They are all most anxious to see you again, and if only 6 of such persons, nay, a single one would suffice, were to take you by the hand, you might do as you pleased. All this notwithstanding, however, we cannot but feel that Wolfgang's consciousness of his true vocation and his lively protest against any sort of pressure from without did honor to him, far more honor than the insinuation of unbelief against his true friend Wendling, to whom he was already deeply indebted. Not that Mozart was insincere. He was a faithful son of his church, but other feelings were at work here, which obscured his judgment. Wendling was inconsolable at Wolfgang's refusal to join the party, and the latter endeavored to persuade himself that motives of personal interest had a share in the regret of his friend. Be it as it may, Wendling and Ramm set off for Paris on February 15th, leaving Wolfgang at Mannheim not quite free from compunction. If I thought, he writes to his father, February 14th, 1778, that you were really annoyed about my not going to Paris with them, I should repent having remained here, but, after all, the road to Paris is not closed to me. L. Mozart was not altogether displeased at the turn of affairs. What really angered him was to hear from Wolfgang, February 4th, 1778, I am getting on at my ease with the music for Monseigneur de Jean, for which I am to have 200 florins. I can stay here as long as I like, for neither my board nor lodging cost me anything. His father had warned him before, December 11th, 1777. If you examine your conscience, you will find that you have a strong tendency to procrastination. And now he writes, February 12th, 1778, I am astonished to hear that you are finishing Monseigneur de Jean's music at your ease. Can it be that you have not already completed it? And you were thinking of leaving Mannheim on the 15th, and have been making expeditions to Kersheim? Well, never mind, only beware that Herr Wendling and Monseigneur de Jean do not play you false, for the proposal was only made with the intention of enabling you to go with them. Let me have an answer by the next post that I may know how the matter stands. The information which Wolfgang furnished, February 14, 1778, was not consolatory. Herr de Jean, who also goes to Paris tomorrow, has paid me only 96 florins, miscalculating the half by 4 florins, because I had written only 2 concerti and 3 quartetti, but he will be obliged to pay me the whole, for I have arranged with Wendling to send the music after them. It is not extraordinary that I should not have been able to finish it. I never have a quiet hour. Night is my only time for writing, for I cannot even get up early. Besides, one is not always in the humor for writing. I could certainly scribble away the whole day, but when a thing is to go forth to the world bearing my name, I am determined that I will not be ashamed of it. You know how stupid I am when I have always to compose for one instrument, and that one which I dislike. I have written other things from time to time for a change, such as a clavier's duets and portions of masses. But now I have set to work in earnest on the clavier duets so that I may have them printed. In a letter from Paris, July 20th, 1778, he mentions only 2 quartets for the flute, and October 3rd, 1778, he speaks of the flute concerto. 2 quartets for flute, violin, viola, and violoncello are known. One of them, Kerschel 281, is inscribed Mannheim il 25th December 1777, and must therefore be the same which is mentioned in the letter of December 18 as being almost finished. It is in D major in the usual 3 movements, the middle one, an adagio 3-8, being accompanied throughout pizzicato, the flute leading the melody. The whole piece is easy both in style and composition. The flute kept mainly in the foreground, and the accompanying parts firmly and skillfully handled without any actual elaboration. The second quartet, Kerschel 298, according to a notice appended by a strange hand to the original manuscript in the Imperial Library at Vienna, was composed in Paris in 1778. It is in A major and begins with variations on a simple theme, in which each instrument in succession comes in obbligato. Then follows a minuet, and as a final, a rondeau, the heading of which testifies to Mozart's merry humor. It runs, Allegretto grazioso, ma non troppo presto, però non troppo adagio, così con molto garbo ed espressione. It is likewise easy in every respect, shorter and somewhat fresher than the first movement. A flute concerto in D major, Kerschel 314, bears much the same character and was composed for the true philanthropist, the Indian Dutchman. It is lively and cheerful without laying claim to deeper significance. The accompaniment, although kept well in hand, betrays in little touches the practiced hand of a master. An andante in C major for the flute, with orchestral accompaniment, has also been preserved, Kerschel 315. The original is not dated, but the handwriting, the Mannheim paper, and the well-founded assumption that Mozart never wrote for the flute, except by commission, point to this time. Fürstenau, however, remarks that Mozart treats the flute with a perfect knowledge of the instrument, its technique, and easily attained effects. Nothing is known of the Mass on which he was engaged at Mannheim unless a detached Kyrie in E-flat, Kerschel 322, serious and dignified in expression, original and free in treatment, may be referred to this period. He writes on the 28th February 1778 that he has still 2 clavier sonatas to write, but I am not in a hurry with them, for they cannot be printed here. Nothing can be done by subscription. It is beggary, and the engraver will not take the risk on himself unless I promise him half the profits. I would rather have them printed in Paris, where the publishers are glad of something new and pay capitally, and where much also can be done by subscription. One of the sonatas, Kochel 304, was, according to the inscription, finished in Paris. All the 6 were published there in 1778 by Sieber, and were dedicated to the Electress, Kochels 301 to 306. Wolfgang's dilatoriness was a hard blow to his father, who had counted on the price of these compositions to cover the cost of the Mannheim visit and of the journey to Paris. He saw plainly that he must not only defray these himself, but must also provide for the future, and he found himself in great perplexity. He writes in troubled strain, February 16, 1778. We have tried every means to make you happy, and ourselves through you, and at least to set your future career on a firm foundation. But fate has willed that we should not succeed. Our last venture has sunk me very low indeed, and, as you know, I am now 700 florins in debt, knowing not how I am to support myself, your mother, and sister on my monthly pay. Not a kreutzer can I hope for from our prince. You cannot but see clearly, therefore, that the future fate of your old parents and of your good devoted sister is in your hands. The sister, an ever-present witness of the cares and perplexities of her father, at a loss to know how the New Year's bills were to be met, or how he was to procure the new clothes he needed, grasped the state of affairs very thoroughly. She practiced the clavier with redoubled zeal, and had made great efforts thoroughly to master thorough-bass and the art of preluding. She foresaw that after her father's death, her music would be her mother's and her own sole dependence. She was deeply grieved at the bad news from Wolfgang, and had her full share of weeping. Wolfgang wrote crossly that she should not cry for nothing, February 19, 1778. But he must have felt ashamed of himself when his father's answer to this came, February 26, 1778. She did not cry over nothing when she cried over your letter, but nevertheless, she said when she heard that you had not got the 200 florins, "Thank God that it is no worse," although she has considerable interest in the matter and knows that in order to go on helping you, her own just claims must be laid aside. And why was it, the father must have asked himself, that Wolfgang was so suddenly blind to his own interests and forgetful of his duty to his family? It required no great skill in reading between the lines to find the answer in his son's own letters. The stay in Mannheim influenced his artistic life through the intellectual atmosphere of a capital in which flourished German science and German art. But beyond and above this, it was there that he was seized by the passion which sways the innermost being of man and blunts for the time every other feeling. We have seen how susceptible he always was to female charms, and how he delighted in intercourse with agreeable women, whose attractions often threw a favorable light on his opinion of their musical acquirements. Now, for the first time, there awoke in his heart a passionate attachment to a young singer of extraordinary talent. The beauty of her voice as it developed under his loving tuition, coupled with the unhappy circumstances of her life, increased the young man's generous ardor and aroused his lively sympathy. Aloysia Weber, the second daughter of a man in a subordinate position at the theater, was 15 years of age and of great beauty. His letters, outwardly expressive only of his admiration for her singing, are not the less indicative of the state of his heart. Artistic delight and loving passion are charmingly and unconsciously blended in every sentence. The view which it is permitted us to take of the innocent heart of a youth who could feel as warmly and tenderly as he could judge impartially and artistically is the more striking, since it helps us to apprehend how much was torn away with this bud destined never to unfold into blossom. Wolfgang first mentions her in an account of a little professional tour, January 17, 1778. Next Wednesday I am going for a few days to Kirchheim, Poland, to the Princess of Orange, page 43. I have heard so much that is good of her that at last I have decided. A Dutch officer and my very good friend was dreadfully scolded by her for not bringing me with him when he went to pay his respects at the New Year. I shall get at least 8 louis d'or, for she is a great musical amateur, and I've had 4 songs copied for her. I shall give her a symphony, too, for she has a nice little orchestra, and gives concerts every day. The copying of the songs will not cost me much, for it has been done by a certain Herr Weber, who is going over with me. He has a daughter of 15 who sings extremely well, with a beautiful, pure voice. She only wants action to be fit for a prima donna on any stage. Her father is a good, true-hearted German who has brought up his children well, which is the reason that the girl is persecuted here. He has 6 children, 5 daughters and 1 son. For 14 years he supported himself and his family on 200 florins a year, and because he has always faithfully fulfilled his duties and has provided the elector with a first-rate singer, he is now actually 400 florins. She sings my song for De Micis, with the fearful passages excellently well. She's going to sing it at Kirchheim, Poland. After his return, he narrates the particulars of this holiday trip, February 2nd, 1778. We sent a note at once to the castle, and next day the concertmeister, Rothfischer, waited on us. In the evening we went to the court, it being Saturday. Mademoiselle Weber sang 3 songs. I pass over her singing with one word: excellent. I spoke to you of her merits in my last letter, and I shall not be able to close this without saying more, as I am now learning to know her better and to appreciate her full powers. Afterwards we supped at the officers' table. Sunday and Monday we dined at court. There was no music on Sunday evening. There never is, so that they have only about 300 musical evenings in the year. We might have joined the gaming table, but much preferred remaining at home. We would willingly have dispensed with the dinner at court, since we are never so happy as when alone together. But we looked at it from an economical point of view, having spent enough already. On Monday there was music, and again on Tuesday and Wednesday. Mademoiselle Weber sang in all 13 times, and twice played the clavier, which she does very well. What surprises me most is her correctness. Only imagine, she played my difficult sonatas slowly, but without missing a note, prima vista, upon my honor. I would rather she played my sonatas than Vogler. I have played in all 12 times, and once by desire on the organ in the Lutheran church, and I have waited on the princess with 4 symphonies. For all this, I have received 7 louis d'or in silver money, and my poor dear Weber 5. Basta! We have lost nothing by it. I have clear 42 florins profit, and the inexpressible pleasure of having made the acquaintance of true-hearted Catholic and Christian people. Apropos, you must not be surprised that my 77 florins have been reduced to 42 florins. It was a true pleasure to come together with good, sympathetic people. I could not do otherwise than pay half the expenses, but that will not happen on any other journey. I have said already I shall only pay for myself. Afterwards we stayed 5 days at Worms, where Herr Weber has a brother-in-law, the dean of the monastery, who stands in fear of Herr Weber's sharp-pointed pen. We were very merry and dined and supped every day with the dean. I can truly say that this little journey has been good practice on the clavier for me. The dean is a very wealthy, sensible man. Now it is time that I conclude. If I were to write all that, I think I should run short of paper. End of section 44.
Section 45 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Mozart, Volume 1, by Otto JAHN, translated by Pauline D. TOWNSEND and others. Section 45. After his return to Mannheim, he devoted almost his whole time to the Webers, and to the musical education of their gifted daughter. He studied with her all the songs which he had brought, and begged his father to send him from Salzburg an aria cantabile, cadenzas, and anything else suitable. Then he procured her an opportunity of being heard. He writes (February 14, 1778), "Yesterday Cannabich gave a concert, and everything performed, except the first symphony by Cannabich himself, was mine. Mademoiselle Rose played my concerto in B flat, Gürtel 238. Then, by way of a change, Herr Ramm played, for the 5th time, my oboe concerto for Ferlandi, which has made a great sensation here. Ramm makes it his cheval de bataille. Afterwards, Mademoiselle Weber sang D'Amici's aria de bravura quite charmingly. Then I played my old concerto in D, Gürtel 175, because it is such a favorite here. Then I improvised for half an hour, and afterwards Mademoiselle Weber sang, with great applause, Patto M'affretto, Lucia Cilia, Gürtel 135. My overture to the Re Pastore was the finale." He had the satisfaction of hearing from Ralph, who certainly never flatters when asked his true opinion. She sang like a professor, not a learner. As an expression of his feelings for Lucia, Wolfgang composed the song (Gürtel 294), which comes more direct from his heart than any other of his compositions. February 28, 1778. "I have taken the aria Non so don divine, etc., as an exercise in composition, just because it has been so beautifully done by Bach, because I know and admire his rendering so much that it is always in my ears. I wanted to try whether, in spite of this, I could not write a song which should not be like Bach's. It is not at all, not in the least like. I intended the song for Ralph at first, but the beginning was too high, and it pleased me too much to be altered. Besides, the instrumentation seemed to make it more fitted for a soprano. I therefore decided to write the song for Mademoiselle Weber. I laid it aside and set to work on Se al labbro for Ralph. But it was of no use. I could write nothing else while the first song was in my head. So I finished it, and set myself to make it exactly suited to Mademoiselle Weber. It is an andante sostenuto, followed by a short recitative. In the middle comes the second part, Nel seno a destrarmi, then again the sostenuto. When it was finished, I said to Mademoiselle Weber, 'Learn the song for yourself, sing it according to your own taste, then let me hear it, and I will tell you candidly what pleases me, and what does not please me.' In 2 days she sang it to me and accompanied herself. I was obliged to acknowledge that she sang it as well as I could wish, and just as I would have had it done. It is the best song which she has, and will gain her applause wherever she sings it." This assertion was justified at a concert given by Cannabich, at which Rose Cannabich, Mademoiselle Weber, and Mademoiselle Perron Serrarius, after 3 rehearsals, played the concerto for 3 claviers very well. "Mademoiselle sang 2 of my songs, Il Tranquillo from the Re Pastore, Gürtel 208, and the new one, Non so don divine. The dear creature did herself and me infinite honour. Every one said that she surpassed herself in this song. She sang it just as it should be sung. Cannabich called out aloud when it was finished, 'Bravo, bravissimo, maestro! Veramente scritta la maestro!' This was the first time I had heard it with the instruments. I wish you could have heard it as it was sung then, with such accuracy of taste, such piano and forte. Who knows, you may hear it yet. I hope so. The orchestra have not left off yet praising and talking of the song." And he himself cannot leave off talking of it. "I do certainly wish you could hear my new song sung by her. I say by her, for it is just made for her. You, who know what is meant by singing with portamento, would find rare satisfaction in her singing of it." He proceeds to beg his father not to allow the song, which he sends him, to be sung by any one else, since it was written only for Mademoiselle Weber, and fits her like a garment. In truth, this song is very beautiful, the simple and natural expression of what he felt and wished to imply to the singer, original in form and treatment. Strikingly original are the short violin passages between the phrases of the recitative. The chief movement is adagio, cantabile throughout, in its calm steady progress beautifully expressive of alternate doubt and resolution. A very effective contrast is formed by the animated allegro agitato, which leads back to the adagio in an unexpected but charming manner. The adagio is not simply repeated, but the important points are accentuated, partly by the harmonic treatment, partly by stronger emphasis, and the grouping and connection are varied. The loving care of the composer is displayed again in his management of the orchestra. The stringed instruments are accurate in detail and written with a view to effect. For instance, when the voice in its highest, sharpest tones is accompanied by the violins in a far lower position, the effect is excellent. The second violin part is well thought out, and the accompaniment rich without being overpowering, as wind instruments, the flutes, clarinets, horns, and bassoons, are so combined as to give intensity and brilliancy to the coloring of the whole. They are employed with a full mastery of effect, either alone or in varied combination. The following is the original situation in Metastasio's Olympiad. Clisthenes, king of Sicyon, has doomed to death an unknown youth, as afterwards appears, his son, because he has attempted to assassinate him. But in the act of delivering him to death, he feels himself wonderfully moved by the aspect of the youth, and turns to his confidant with the words, Alcandro, lo confesso, stupisco di me stesso. Il volto, il cligo, la voce di costui nel cor mi desta, un palpito improviso, che lo risenti in ogni fibra il song. Fra tutti I miei pensieri la cangion, ne ricerco e non la trovo. Che sarà, gusti dei, questo c'io provo. Non si donde viene, quel tenero affetto, quel moto, che ignoto, mi nasce nel petto. Que gel che la viene, scorrendo mi va, nel seno a destarmi, si fieri contrast. Non parmi che basti, lo sol da pieta. Mozart describes graphically how the voice and singing of Mademoiselle Weber floated before him, and inspired his composition, but he does not tell us how Metastasio's words, released from their dramatic connection, became the soliloquy of a young heart, feeling with amazement the first stirrings of love, and scarcely venturing to realize the depth and intensity of its passion. For pity is assuredly not enough to excite such expressions of emotion. This was the condition of his own heart, and what he felt himself that he also placed in the heart of his beloved, and, being an artist, on her lips, certainly without analyzing his feelings or hers. The song expresses purely and beautifully the emotions of a maiden who stands in doubt and perplexity at the innocent impulses of her heart, incomprehensible even to herself. But her budding inclination has not yet become a dominant passion, and she feels that she stands at the turning point of her whole existence. There reposes, therefore, on the whole song the calmness and purity of innocence, together with intense warmth and deep agitation, and Mozart has lent to these emotions the inexpressible charm of melody. The charm is not broken by the occurrence of sharper discords than are usual with Mozart, but they are both appropriately placed, and in full harmony with the tone of the whole. The song gives a favorable indication of the powers of the singer. The style is simple and sustained throughout, varied by original and expressive embellishments, and at the close by a couple of quick runs going up to. It excites no small astonishment to find such capabilities of voice, execution, and delivery in a girl of 15. Mozart composed the same song again for the bass singer Fischer in March 1787, Churchill 512. The construction of the song is, as the words require, the same, but the treatment is as different as possible. This time the true sense of the dramatic situation is grasped. A man, a ruler, who has a long life's experience behind him, feels his strong mind moved to a tenderness which he cannot understand, and which therefore troubles him. He seeks to resist it, but falls ever again under its irresistible sway. The sense of surprise and passionate resistance is powerfully rendered, and many passages, quel gel che sorrendo la vine mi va, for instance, are of wonderful power and beauty. In fact, the song presupposes the union of strength and softness, flexibility of voice and cultivated delivery, which existed to perfection in Fischer. It might be said as truly of him as of Mademoiselle Weber, that the song fitted him like a garment. Mozart's change of determination with regard to the Parisian journey is easily explained by the light of his love for Mademoiselle Weber, though he was far from acknowledging this, even to himself. No doubt he was sincere in writing to his father (February 4th, 1778), "It is out of the question for me to travel with a man who leads a life of which the youngest among us would be ashamed, and the thought of assisting a poor family, without doing harm to myself, pleases me to the very depths of my soul." He longed ardently to liberate the Weber family from their trying position, but love for his Alicia was the most powerful, although the secret, motive. The direction of his thoughts may be gathered from his remarks on the wealthy marriage made by his friend Herr von Schiedenhofen (February 7, 1778). "It is a mercenary marriage, and nothing further. I could not marry in that way. I should like to make my wife happy, and not expect to make my fortune through her. So I will let it alone for the present, and enjoy my freedom until I can afford to support a wife and family. It was necessary for Herr von Schiedenhofen to choose a rich wife for the sake of his title. The nobility can never marry from inclination or love, but only from interest and various considerations. It would not become such high personages to love their wives when once they have brought into the world a fat little son and heir. But we poor common folk, not only may we take a wife whom we love, and who loves us, but we ought, can, and will take such a one, for we are not nobly born, autocratic or rich, but lowly, mean, and poor, and so not needing a rich wife. Our wealth dies with us, for it is in our brains, and no one can take it from us, unless he cut off our head, and then we should not want anything more." The father must have shaken his head at this diatribe. Wolfgang's wish at least to live in the neighborhood of Alicia, until he could call her his own, was joined to his irresistible impulse to compose operas. In order to attain both these ends, he had conceived a project which would, he supposed, be of equal advantage to her family and his own. The Webers were quite ready to fall in with what was clearly to their advantage, and it only remained to obtain the consent of Wolfgang's father to his remaining in Mannheim and completing the compositions he had undertaken. "At the same time, Herr Weber will be exerting himself to get concert engagements for himself and me. We shall travel together, too. Traveling with him will be just the same as traveling with you. In fact, the reason I like him so much is, that excepting in appearance, he resembles you entirely. His temper and turn of mind are identical with yours. If my mother were not, as you know, averse to much writing, she would say the same thing. I must acknowledge that I enjoyed traveling with the Webers. We were happy together, and merry, and I had the satisfaction of conversing with a man like yourself. I had no need to trouble myself about anything. If anything was torn, I found it mended. In fact, I was treated like a prince. This oppressed family has become so dear to me that it is my greatest wish to make them happy, which is perhaps in my power. My advice is that they should go to Italy. You would be doing me a great favor if you would write as soon as possible to our good friend Luggiati, and inquire from him as to what is the greatest sum paid to a prima donna in Verona. The higher the better, for it is easy to lower one's terms, and perhaps she could get a better engagement afterwards in Venice. I will stake my life on her singing, and I know that she does me honor. She has profited much in my instruction, even in this short time, and I have not much doubt as to her acting powers. If all this takes place, we, that is, Monsieur Weber, his 2 daughters, and I, shall have the honor of paying a passing visit in a fortnight or so to my dear father and my dear sister, and my sister will find a friend and companion. She enjoys the same reputation here on account of her good bringing up as my sister does in Salzburg. Her father is respected as mine is, and the whole family is like the Mozart family. This arouses envy in the same way, of course, but when it comes to the point the most envious are obliged to speak the truth. Honesty is the best policy. I cannot tell you how pleased I should be to bring them to Salzburg, only that you might hear her. She sings my songs written for De Amicus, the bravura songs, as well as Pato me fretto and Dalla sponda taborosa, quite superbly. I beg that you will do your best to help us to go to Italy. You know my greatest ambition, to write operas. I would gladly write an opera for 30 sequins at Verona, that she might gain reputation by it, for if I had not written it, I fear she would be sacrificed. In the meantime, I shall make so much money by the expeditions I shall make with them, that I shall not be in any way injured. I think we shall go to Switzerland. perhaps also to Holland. Write to me soon about it. If it all comes to pass, the other daughter, who is the elder, will be very useful, for she cooks well, and we can keep house for ourselves. I only beg you not to delay answering me. Do not forget my wish to write operas. I am jealous of everyone who writes one. I could weep for vexation when I hear or see an aria. But Italian, not German. Seraria, not buffa. Now I have laid open my whole heart to you, and my mother is quite of my way of thinking. I kiss your hand 1,000 times, and am, till death, your obedient son. In a later letter he repeats his pressing request. February 14th, 1778. I earnestly entreat you to do what you can for Weber. I have his success very much at heart, a man and his wife, 5 children, and an income of 450 florins. Remember my request to go to Italy, and also about myself. You know my ambition and my passion. I hope it will all go right. I put my trust in God, and he will not forsake me. Now farewell, and do not forget my earnest petition and recommendation. End of section 45. Recording by Todd.
Section 46 of The Life of Mozart, Volume 1 by Otto JAHN. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Katharina Huang. The Life of Mozart by Otto JAHN. Translated by Pauline D. Townsend and others. Section 46. Chapter 17, Part 8. Wolfgang's mother was not quite so much of his opinion as he imagined. This is apparent from her postscript, which shows also that she was entirely without influence over her son. My dear husband, you will perceive from this letter that when Wolfgang makes a new friendship, he is ready to sacrifice his life and all he holds dear for the object of it. It is true that she sings divinely, but one should never so entirely set aside one's own interests. I have never approved of the companionship with Wendeling and Ramm, but I dared not make any objection, and I am never listened to. But as soon as he knew the Webers, he altered his mind altogether. In fact, he prefers being with other people to being with me. I object to this thing and that which does not please me, and that annoys him. So you must decide for yourself what is to be done. I write this in the greatest secrecy while he is dining. And what said the father? The letter was a greater blow than any which had yet befallen him, and Wolfgang's romantic project almost bereaved him of reason. He did not indeed doubt that much persuasion had been brought to bear on Wolfgang to induce him to prefer a vagabond life to the fame which could be acquired in a city so celebrated and so ready to welcome true talent as Mannheim. But he was horrified to find that the influence of strangers could so deprive him of consideration for himself and others. Your kind heart leads you to see no fault in any man who praises you loudly and exalts you to the skies, and to bestow all your love and confidence on him. When you were a child, on the contrary, your modesty was so excessive that you wept when you were openly praised. Sharp remedies seemed in this case necessary, and these L. Mozart applies with all the authority of an experienced man, and the severity of a conscientious father. He lays before his son in an exhaustive letter how far he has hitherto been from attaining the main object of his journey, and how much he is in danger of forgetting his duty to his family and himself for the gratification of a senseless passion. It was not difficult to show that the idea was immature and impracticable to produce a young girl who had never sung in public nor appeared on the stage before an Italian public, which would be certain to condemn her even if she sang like Gabrielli herself. L. Mozart goes on to show how, with war threatening, the present was not the time for a professional tour, and how a wandering life with a stranger and his daughters would deprive him of his reputation, ruin his prospects, and bring disgrace on his family. It lies now in your own power alone to raise yourself to as high a position as a musician has ever attained. You owe all to the extraordinary talent bestowed upon you by the all-gracious God, and it depends upon your own sense and behavior whether you become an ordinary musician forgotten by the world, or a celebrated Kapellmeister whose fame shall be handed down to posterity in books, whether you herd all together in a room full of squalling brats on a heap of straw, or spend a Christian life full of honor, pleasure, and profit, and die respected by all the world, leaving your family well provided for. L. Mozart felt that immediate action was necessary. All his former objection to the journey to Paris vanished before the necessity of extricating his son from his present dangerous entanglement. "Away with you to Paris, and that soon!" he cried. "Put yourself at the side of great man, aut Kaiser aut nihil." The mere thought of seeing Paris should have preserved you from all passing distractions. The name and fame of a man of great talent goes through all the world from Paris. The company of Wendeling and Ramm was not as important to him as he was to them, but his mother must go with him in order to arrange everything properly. They were not to limit their stay to a few months, but were to remain as long as was necessary to gain renown and money. The more so, since Paris was the safest place to live in during war. Hard as it was upon him, the father undertook to provide money and letters of credit for the journey. In making this appeal to the conscience, the ambition, and the better judgment of his son, L. Mozart was wise enough not to allude directly to his attachment to Aloysia Weber, although he must have been well aware of its existence. Wolfgang had not openly expressed it, and his father was careful not to oppose a sentiment which was invincible because inaccessible to reason. But as a proof that he was not indifferent to the misfortunes of those with whom Wolfgang had so much sympathy, he did not withhold the advice for which he had been asked. The man who could best help them was Raff. Wolfgang should endeavor to interest him in Mademoiselle Weber, and his influence would be all-powerful with the Impresa. He further advised that she should make her debut on the Mannheim stage, were it only for the sake of practice. The effect of this letter was what he anticipated. Wolfgang was brought to the knowledge of the fact that he has nearer duties to fulfill, to which his dreams and aspirations after an uncertain future must give way. He yielded with a heavy heart, but with childlike submission to his father's will, and answered, February 19th, 1778. I always anticipated that you would be against the journey with the Webers, for I never seriously entertained the idea myself, that is, under our present circumstances, but I had given my word that I would write to you about it. Herr Weber does not know how we stand. I have told no one, and so because I wanted to be free from care for anyone, and to be happy together, I forgot the present impossibility of the affair, and also to inform you of my true opinion of it. What you say concerning Mademoiselle Weber is all true, and, as I wrote before, I know as well as you do that she is too young, and wants the power of acting, and should therefore recite in the theatre as often as possible. But one has to proceed cautiously with some people. The good Webers are as tired of being here as someone else you know was elsewhere, and they are inclined to think everything possible. I had promised them to write to my father, but even before my letter had reached Salzburg, I had been advising them to be patient, that she was a little too young, etc. They take everything well from me, for they have a high opinion of me. The father has spoken by my advice to Madame Toscani, an actress, about giving his daughter instruction in acting. All that you say of Mademoiselle Weber is true, except one thing, that she sings like a Gabrielle. I should be very sorry if she did. Everyone who has heard Gabrielle says she was nothing but a passage and roulade maker. In a word, that she sang with art but no understanding. Page 135. But Mademoiselle Weber sings from her heart, and cantabile by preference. I am now making her sing passages in the great aria, because it is necessary, if she goes to Italy, that she should sing bravura songs. She will not forget her cantabile, because it comes natural to her. Now you know all, and I recommend her to you with my whole heart. But it was a hard struggle that he had to make with himself. It affected his health, and he was for several days confined to his room. His father's warnings had struck chords in his innermost being, which vibrated painfully. The thought of having forfeited his father's full confidence rendered him inconsolable. Believe whatever you please of me, only not that I am wicked. There are people who believe it is impossible to love a poor girl without having evil intentions. I am no Brunetti, and no Miss Livezek. I am a Mozart, a young but an honorable Mozart. Gradually, however, his loving trust in his father regained its old supremacy. God first, and then Papa. That was my motto as a child, and I am true to it still. He and his mother began to prepare in earnest for their departure, and the father was ready with instructions and good advice, nor did he withhold the parental blessing from his well-loved son. How deeply I feel the wider separation that is about to take place between us you can partly imagine. But I cannot expect you to feel the intensity with which it oppresses me. If you will only reflect seriously on all that I did for you two children in your early years, you will not certainly accuse me of timidity. But you will do me the justice to acknowledge that I am and always have been a man with courage to venture anything. At the same time, I used all possible prudence and foresight against accidents no one can provide, for God alone sees into the future. I have not, my dear Wolfgang, the least mistrust in you. On the contrary, I have perfect confidence and hope in your filial love. Everything now depends on the sound understanding which you certainly possess if you will only listen to it, and upon fortunate circumstances. These last are not to be controlled, but I hope and pray that you will always take counsel of your understanding. You are now about to enter a new world, and you must not believe that I am prejudiced in considering Paris so dangerous a place. Au contraire, my own experience gives me no cause to think it at all dangerous, but the circumstances of my former and your present stay there are as widely asunder as heaven and earth. After explaining this in more detail, and giving Wolfgang minute directions as to the position he should take in Paris, L. Mozart concludes with these words: I know that you look upon me not only as your father, but as your truest and firmest friend. and that you are well aware that our happiness and misery, nay more, my long life or speedy death, are, under God, so to speak, in your hands. If I know you aright, I have nothing to look forward to but that pleasure which will be my only consolation in your absence, and I must resign myself to neither seeing, hearing, nor embracing you, live like a good Catholic Christian, love God and fear Him, pray to Him sincerely and devoutly, and let your conduct be such that, should I never see you again, my deathbed may be free from anxiety. From my heart I bless you, and remain till death your loving father and firmest friend. It was only when Mozart's departure from Mannheim drew very near that the loss on both sides was fully realized. The farewell concerts which he arranged as displays for himself, his compositions, and his pupils, impressed his extraordinary talents on the public mind. Regrets at his departure were heard on all sides, not only from musicians but from all men of cultivation who had the fame of Mannheim at heart. Among them, the author of the Deutsche Hausvater, March 24th, 1778. Before leaving Mannheim, I made copies for Herr von Gemmingen of the quartet, 80K, which I wrote that evening in the inn at Lodi, also of the quintet, 174K, and of the Fischer variations, 179K. He wrote me an extremely polite note, expressing his pleasure at the remembrance, and sent me a letter to his very good friend, Herr von Sickingen, adding, I am well assured that you will do more to recommend this letter than it can possibly do to recommend you, and he sent me 3 louis d'or to cover the cost of copying the music. He assured me of his friendship, and begged for mine in return. I must say that all the cavaliers who knew me, the court councillors, chamberlains, court musicians, and other good people, were vexed and disappointed at my leaving. There is no mistake about that. He was in some degree consoled by the prospect of finding opportunities for composition in Paris. February 28th, 1778. What I chiefly look forward to in Paris is the Concert Spirituel, for which I shall probably have to write something. The orchestra is so good and strong, and my most favorite compositions, choruses, can be well performed there. I am very glad that the Parisians are so fond of them. The only fault that was found with Piccinni's new opera, Roland, was that the choruses were weak and poor, and the music altogether a little monotonous. Otherwise, it was very well received. The Parisians were accustomed to Gluck's choruses. Rely upon me. I shall do all that is in my power to bring honor to the name of Mozart. I am not afraid. The parting from Mademoiselle Weber had still to be gone through. He describes it candidly to his father. March 24th, 1778. Mademoiselle Weber very kindly netted me a purse as a remembrance and small acknowledgment of my services. Her father copied all that I wanted for me and gave me some music paper and Molière's comedies, which he knew I had not read, with the inscription, Ricevi, amico, le opere del Molière I segnal di gratitudine e qualche volta ricordati di me. When he was alone with Mamma, he said, We are losing our best friend, our benefactor. Yes, there is no doubt that your son has done much for my daughter, and has interested himself in her so that she cannot be grateful enough to him. The day before I left, they wanted me to sup with them, but I could not be away from home, so refused. but I was obliged to spend a couple of hours before supper with them, and they never left off thanking me, and wishing they were in a position to testify their gratitude. When at last I went away, they all wept. It is very foolish, but the tears come in my eyes whenever I think of it. He went down the steps with me, and stood at the house door till I had turned the corner, when he called for the last time, "Adieu." This time the father painted no leave-taking on the quoits, but thanked God in his heart that his son had escaped a great danger. Wolfgang did not openly declare that his love for Mademoiselle Weber was heartfelt and sincere, and that he believed it to be returned, that he went forth with the full determination of winning a position and being able to call her his own. But he was little careful to conceal these hopes from his father, as to hide from him the correspondence which he carried on with the Webers. The father, with full confidence in the honorable character of his son, was content to leave this connection to the future, so soon as he saw the first step assured in Wolfgang's professional career. Our glance must needs linger with approbation on the picture of a youth glowing with ardent passion, yet with self-mastery enough to listen to the first warning of his good and wise father, and so sure of the constancy of his feelings as to be willing to yield his warmest wishes to the fulfillment of his moral duties. In the love and confidence existing between father and son, we rejoice to acknowledge the best and truest ornament of a German artist's life. End of section 46. Chapter 17, Part 8. End of the Life of Mozart, Volume 1, by Otto JAHN, translated by Pauline D. Townsend and others.